where the power cord from the wall plugs into. Now, the electricity that comes in here from the power cord is 120 volt AC power. However, the components inside a computer use DC power. This means the AC power from the outlet needs to be converted to DC power, and this is actually one of the main functions of a power supply. The 120 volt AC power from the wall flows into the power supply where it's converted into 3 DC voltage levels, 12 volts, 5 volts, and 3.3 volts. This is because different components have different voltage requirements. The converted DC power flows out the power supply's wire bundle, which is on the opposite side of the power supply here. The power supply's wire bundle contains a variety of wired connectors that plug into components and provide them with the correct voltage of DC power. Now, it's important to know that the number of components a power supply can handle isn't based on the number of its connectors. For example, a power supply could have 10 hard drive connectors, but this doesn't mean it can power up 10 hard drives. Instead, power supplies use a power rating called watts, which is a measurement of its maximum power output. Now, for most desktop computers, a 350 watt power supply should be sufficient. However, when you start adding additional hard drives, optical drives, and high-end video cards, your power needs increase substantially. As such, it's usually best to invest in a more powerful one, such as a 500 or 650 watt power supply. If necessary, you can identify your exact power needs by adding up the wattage requirements for each component you need to power. There are also several websites you can use to calculate specific power needs. Remember, one of the power supply's main functions is to provide power to components, but if the connected components draw more power than the power supply can handle, it will shut off. Another part of the power supply is its fan. Most ATX power supplies will have a large fan on it that helps to cool the unit. However, this fan serves a secondary purpose. When installed in a case, a power supply's fan aids in thermal management. Power supplies are typically installed in the back top of a computer case, directly above the CPU. This positioning allows the power supply's fan to pull hot air out of the computer case, allowing cooler air from the front of the case to flow in. This helps to maximize cooling by creating a wind tunnel effect inside the case. Those are the basic computer power supplies. Remember, power supplies have 2 primary functions. First, they convert AC power to DC power, and second, they provide 12, 5, and 3.3 volts of DC power to components. Power supplies also provide a secondary function, which is to aid in thermal management.
All right. So now you know the basics about power supplies. So now we're going to go into our first lab, which is we're going to go into 325. And 325 is installing a power supply. Guess, oh, there you go. All right, so let me share my screen here, my secondary screen. All right. So in this lab, we're going to install a power supply. So the purpose of this lab, well, basically we're an administrator in a small corp, and it appears basically the power supply that we have in our desktop appears to have failed. After testing the power supply and confirming the failure, remove it from the computer. We need to select a replacement. So what we're trying to accomplish, we're going to select a power supply from our shelf. The power supply must have an appropriate power connectors for the motherboard. You need to make sure the power supply you select will support adding a graphics card. Basically, the graphics card goes into your card slot or PCI slot, so it should have the appropriate power connectors. And then we're going to connect all of the cables. We're going to connect the motherboard power connector, connect the CPU power connector, connect the power connectors for the hard drives, The SATA hard drive is connected to power connector for the optical drive, which is usually a DVD or CD drive. Plug the computer in using the existing cable into the power strip and then turn on the power supply. And then we want to start our computer and boot up to Windows. All right, so let's get started. Okay, so essentially if we expand our shelf here, we have what looks like the same power supply, and essentially we didn't talk about the parameters or specifications for power supply, the motherboard. Just to let you know, there's a standard for certain motherboards, but generally, if you go into a computer shop, they will have one or two standard power supplies that will actually accommodate most motherboards, but not all. So you do have to be very careful. So if we look at, and please get in the habit of doing this with the lab, take the component, select it from the shelf, especially power supplies, take a look at the cables. We know that we need to have one that supports PCI and SATA, or SATA, excuse me. And when you initially pull it from the shelf, it will not show you the connectors until you actually place it in your PC. So basically we want to open up our PC by clicking on the motherboard tab, and then essentially take that power supply and place it in its area where it's going to be located in your desktop. And once you do that, then you can read the cabling that you have. We have a 20+4 power cable. We have a power supply pin processor cable. We have SATA cables, 2 of them. We have a connector power for a floppy, which is pretty much obsolete now. We have connector powers for IDE, or this is usually an optical drive or CD drive, and then we have an additional floppy. Now, I'm thinking that this may work, but it is an ATX, which I think these are all ATXs. But the best thing to do is go ahead and select one of the power supplies and begin to connect the cables. So the first thing we need to do is, one of the bullet points asks us to make sure the power supply you select will support adding a graphics card. Now, graphics cards are usually some type of PCI connection. And I don't necessarily see, do you all see a PCI here anywhere, or anything that allocates PCI as far as your power supply? The one thing you can do, we can't do that until we select the power supply. We can select, that's the chassis, and we'll get to that as well in our next lab. All right, so let's get started. We know that this is our power connector, this 20+4 pin power, and you see these are very, very standard for power supply to motherboard. So, and it's usually the connection, and if you zoom in a little bit, you can see that that's really the only connector, and it's standard placement for a motherboard. There's that top right area, and it's really the only port or connector that will support that that type of cable. All right. And remember, working in your shelf, basically you want to click on the component to make sure you can see the cables. All right, so that's our motherboard power connector. Now we want to connect the CPU power connector. Now, I don't know if you should know that this particular fan in here, and underneath that fan, that's actually a CPU fan. If you see that it does say Intel, and it does have some general information about the CPU. but essentially without the fan, the CPU will not function. Well, it will function, but remember, this is a processor, so it's processing, billions of bits of information, and it'll generate heat because it's actually moved using electrical pulses and all that. But I'm not going to get into the engineering aspect of it. So as far as the CPU connection, and once again, I would recommend, and it's really hard to see on this motherboard, try and zoom in as much as you can. Do that. Also, and basically this is the way that I learned, take a look at the actual connector or the actual cable. Now do we have a connector on this power supply for CPU? Do you see a CPU connection on this power supply? Yes or no? Oh, let me admit James. So what I'm saying, sorry.
Yes,
You do see a CPU?
it says 8-pin CPU.
And where do you see that? On this power supply that I selected.
Oh, maybe I chose a different power supply.
Did you select a different one? And
Yeah,
that brings up a very interesting point. So you do have to check to see that you have the correct cables. So I don't see a CPU, or at least the CPU connection that we should have for this power supply. So, and this is the problem that you'll run into. If you don't have the true specs in front of you, most of the technicians will have the specs in front of them, so they know exactly which ATX power supply to choose. So let's go ahead and take the cable out of this one and put it back on the shelf. Let's see. Select the power supply. That's not the right one. So let's select another one. And we have our main power on this one. We have 4-pin power supply. We have 4-pin IDE, 4-pin IDE, power connection for the floppy. That looks like it's the same one. So,
There's no SATA on that one.
and there was no SATA on that one either.
Yeah.
So
I think on the specification it says it also have some graphics.
right.
Yeah.
All right. So we just kind of went the long way. It was actually the first one on our shelf. So you see we have our 8-pin CPU, which who's that spoke up? Was that Robert or
James?
James? Yeah. So I still have one student trying to get in. All right, so we know we have all the components on this power supply. We have our power cable, we have our CPU cable. So let's go ahead and connect our power cable to our power cable port. And the CPU cable is usually in the same place, it's the only port that has an 8-pin, well, kind of an 8-pin connection, but this is it here in this area. So let's go ahead and connect that. All right, so now we have our CPU plugged in, as well as our main power from our power supply to our motherboard. Now, we need to connect our drive cables. So we have SATA cables for our hard drives. And if you click on the drive bays, which is basically the other half of the desktop, then you want to essentially provide a power cable. You have data cables going into the drives, or in this case, we only have one drive. So we want to connect the power cable to it. So we want to make sure we go back to the power supply and take one of our SATA cables, they're all the same. That's because if you have several drives, you can actually have power to several drives. And go ahead and plug that into our hard drive. All right. So now we've connected a power cable to our hard drive. We want to connect a power connector to our optical drive, which do we have a drive, optical drive in here? Oops. All right. Or was that our optical drive in the drive bay? And these are our hard drives here. That's what it looks like. It looks like we connected an SAT cable to our optical drive in our drive bays. We go back there. Yes, this looks more like a drive bay or an optical drive to me. But if we go back to our motherboard view,
That's for the,
we see that our hard drives are here. This has 3 separate hard drives. So these will need power as well. So basically we take our SATA cables and connect them to our hard drives. Oops. Oh, you're connected. You're connected. All right. So just to reiterate, these are hard drives here. They're not actually in the drive bay. Normally they have their own special bay where you will actually install the hard drives. And they basically just sit there and then you secure them on like a little shelf within your desktop. And then now the data cables from the motherboard were there. So now we just connected the actual power to our hard drive to have them spin and all that fun stuff. All right, so now we want to plug computer from the existing connection into the power strip. So if you go in the back, we do have a partial connection. So that's already plugged in. The monitor is plugged in. So we're just going to take that partial connection and plug it into our mail in or our mail port to make sure our computer has power. Now, the one thing that you have to remember with these power supplies, some of them actually have a power switch on them, and you do have to check to make sure. See, this is actually the switch to the power supply. And so you actually have to turn that on. If you don't turn that on, then it will not provide power to your motherboard or power to the actual desktop. So remember, whenever you're troubleshooting an issue with power on your PC, check that power supply button. It's a safeguard. It protects your system and your motherboard in many ways. So we've already connected our power to our PC, and we plugged it into, and we know it's in the wall. So let's see if we can boot. So power strip, we turned on the power supply. Well, we know we have power. We hit the power button, the monitor clicks on, and it looks like we're booting to Windows, which means that we have everything connected. All right? Any questions about that lab? All right, so we passed. Yay. All right, so let's go on to our next video. And our next video are 323. And this one I added, I was going to mention to you all, if you look at the original lesson plan, 323 was not there, but I think 323 will definitely help you to understand when we get into the motherboard lab. So we're going to do 323 now, and I think this is more of a benefit for you than leaving it out. So let me cue that up here. So 323 is identifying power supply components, and it's key. And there's two sides of this. Yes, the power supply components are key, and you'll see in the next lab, we'll talk about chassis components and all that. But here we go.
Just like motherboards and cases, power supplies adhere to form factor specifications. This makes matching a power supply to a particular motherboard or case very simple. All you need to do is make sure they're the same form factor. For example, if you have an ATX case, purchase an ATX power supply. Likewise, if you have a micro ATX case, purchase a micro ATX power supply. Now, there's a bit of shared compatibility with power supplies. ATX power supplies are compatible with most micro ATX motherboards and some mini ITX motherboards. However, the inverse isn't necessarily true. Micro ATX and mini ITX power supplies are designed for lower power consumption computers, so they might not be sufficient for a standard ATX motherboard. Also know that micro ATX and mini ITX power supplies are smaller in size than ATX power supplies because they are made to fit in smaller cases. This makes it impossible to use an ATX power supply with a mini ITX case. A good rule of thumb when it comes to form factor compatibility and power supplies is this: larger form factors are almost always compatible with smaller form factors. However, small form factors are rarely compatible with larger form factors. Because of this, it's important for you to be able to identify the different types of power supplies. Here's the 3 most common types of power supplies you'll encounter: the ATX power supply, micro ATX power supply, and mini ITX power supply. Notice the size and shape of the mini ITX power supply. These are made to fit in mini ITX cases and also some proprietary computers such as Dell or HP. Micro ATX and ATX power supplies are actually very similar. However, ATX power supplies are slightly larger and usually won't fit in micro ATX cases. If they do, it might be a very tight fit, which can affect airflow and thermal cooling. In addition to being able to identify these 3 power supplies, you also need to be able to identify the different types of connectors and the components they power. And even though these 3 power supplies are different types, they all have the same types of connectors on them. So let's take a look at the connectors on the ATX power supply. On the back of a power supply is the wire bundle. It's composed of all the various connectors used to power components. The first connector we'll look at is the ATX power plug, which is the defining characteristics of an ATX power supply. The ATX power plug has 24 pins, 2 rows of 12. Depending on the power supply, this plug might be a solid 24-pin plug, or it might be split into one 20-pin plug and one 4-pin plug. The ATX power plug connects to the motherboard and provides several functions. First, and most important, it provides 3.3, 5, and 12 volts of DC power to the motherboard. Second, it sends a power good signal to the motherboard. See, when a power supply first turns on, it does a series of self-tests. These tests ensure that the power supply can provide a consistent flow of the correct voltages. If the tests pass, then the power supply sends a 5-volt current called a power good signal to the motherboard on one of these wires. When the motherboard receives the signal, it allows the computer to turn on. A third function is it provides standby power. As long as the power supply is plugged in, one of these wires supplies the motherboard with a constant 5-volt current, even when the computer is turned off. This constant current actually powers the circuitry that enables the 4th function, which is to provide soft power. One of these wires carries what's called the power on signal. This signal allows the computer to be turned on or off by the operating system or remotely over the network. This is called soft power. Older computers actually had to be turned on or off using a hard switch that physically broke the electrical connection. Soft power merely sends a signal to turn the power supply on or off. The electrical connection is never broken. These next two connectors also plug into the motherboard and are used to provide auxiliary power to the CPU. And this is because most processors require more power than the ATX power plug can provide. Less power-hungry CPUs use this ATX 12-volt 4-pin connector. Newer CPUs require more power and use this 8-pin connector called an EPS 12-volt connector. Next is the PCIe connector. This connector is used to provide dedicated power to high-end video cards. And because some video cards use 6-pin connectors and some use 8, these connectors usually have a 6+2 configuration like this one and are compatible with both types. This next connector is the SATA power connector. It's used by SATA hard drives and SATA optical drives. Now, in some situations, you may encounter power supplies that don't have some of these connectors. Luckily, you can purchase adapters to convert, say, a 4-pin accessory connector into a SATA connector or a 6-pin PCIe connector into an 8-pin PCIe connector. That's it for this lesson. Remember, there are 3 types of power supplies you should be familiar with: ATX, Micro ATX, and Mini ITX. When selecting a power supply, matching the power supply with the case and motherboard form factor is the best way to ensure compatibility. And be sure to know the different types of connectors used by power supplies. Knowing them is important so you can make sure a power supply has all the necessary connectors and enough of them for the computer's components.
All right. So yes, it's the power supply. I can tell you right now, it can be an adventure, but if you're a longtime technician, you get to know the difference between the regular, the micro, and the mini ATXs. But those are the standards. But the key here is that most of those have the same type of connectors, and that's usually where a lot of the confusion comes into play when you're talking about connecting them to a motherboard, because everyone seems to get confused. Those connections on the motherboard are usually the same. Your CPU connection is either a 4 or an 8. Your main one is usually 20. There's not any really, at least a regular desktop. So those two, you want to stick with those, and then the SATA cables are usually the same. And you may have some conversion in there as far as video cables, etc. So that being said, our next lab is a doozy, and I will warn you. Yes, go ahead, James.
Yes, sir. Regarding the power supply, how would you know that it's comparable to a motherboard? Like what do I need to look at on the motherboard specification to say that the power supply is compatible with it?
Okay, normally, and the manufacturers are trying to do much better at this. I can tell you right now, it will be an ATX type power supply for whatever motherboard, but you do have to look on the motherboard specification. It'll tell you if it needs, it'll tell you what type of cables it needs usually. And I'll show you this on the motherboard specification when we start the lab. It's the first place you should look. And then you need, the easiest way in my experience is to match the cables. Because you look at form factors, it talks about, process rate and all that, you get very, very confused. I would recommend, because it'll tell you specifically, a 24-pin power connection, an 8-pin CPU connection. Match those cables, because generally, you'll have several power supplies that are compatible to a motherboard. Generally, that's been standardized with companies like Intel and their processors and some of the motherboard manufacturers. But it is very confusing, and generally you won't have to worry about this, but you will have an instance where your power supply goes out. And I would recommend just taking the power supply out of your PC and taking it down to your computer shop. And unless you want to order it online, then you just look at the part number, the manufacturer number, and you should be okay, because they're pretty much standard now. I would say 20 years ago, it was not. There was probably 50 different power supplies, and it was always impossible to try and match those up with the hundreds of different motherboards. Things are much more standard now on the PC side. You generally won't run into big problems. So, but you do have to match the cables. That's the key.
Yeah. if I was planning to like make a desktop from scratch, I wanna know the exact, they're all of the parts will be compatible with each other. So
Right.
to make,
So the biggest compatibility issue is motherboard and power supplies. Now, generally, if you want to make one from scratch, hopefully you're going to order one of the kits. And the kits will come with a power supply motherboard always. The manufacturers generally don't send them out separate anymore.
they're all together now.
No, they're always together now because there's so
Oh,
many
I see.
issues. So then you can build everything else, but generally you'll get the power supply motherboard, and then you can go with the processor and anything else, hard drives, etc.
Oh, I see.
Because it was a big issue during my day of building computers.
Yeah.
It would take forever to get everything right because everyone had their proprietary types of power supplies, and it was a nightmare. Because it was all these different DC currents that had to be satisfied for the motherboard, and so that has changed quite a bit. The 21st century technician doesn't have to worry about matching much anymore. So, good question, James. Thank you. All right. So our next lab, yes, we are going to choose and install a motherboard. This one can be.
Thank you, sir.
All right, and this.
Wait, it's Carol.
Hey, Carol, go ahead.
Hi. I guess the question last week was about, how do you know what the wires look like and what does a motherboard look like? I know that in the fact sheets, I found them very helpful. It's
Yes.
322,
Yes.
and so I print that out for myself, and then there's the one of the whole motherboard facts 332.
332, yes. I was going
Yeah,
to.
so those are extremely helpful for me when I try to match the board to the power supply.
Yes. So thank you, Carol. There you go. I was going to mention that today. That's a good segue. I'm not going to go over the fact sheets unless we really need to, but if you have any questions about where everything, and I'm going to show you the specification, and that helps you some, but the fact sheets will go into complete detail. So thank you, Carol, for mentioning that. And it's definitely a good idea if you have a printer available, print those fact sheets out. You can print them right from test out and just reference them, especially when these labs become a little bit complicated. We're going to run through one that will challenge. I'm going to try and get you all interacting with this motherboard one because there's a lot that we have to do to get the motherboard running. But if you have those, well, now that Carol has the fact sheet, she's going to whiz right through it. But if you have those
No.
fact sheets available, it'll make your adventure. And motherboards, to be honest, they're not really that bad anymore. I mean, if all you have to use is mostly common sense. You have cables that can go certain places and it can't go other places. And obviously you have to read, the motherboard will have some indication of where things are. And I'll show you how that's laid out. And it'll give you some indication with the specifications. We'll talk about that as well. But let's get started on this motherboard one, because this one will take us some time. So, all right. Any other questions? Yes, thanks, Carol.
Thank you.
Given them already a head start. All right. So let me share my screen here. All right, so 335, choose and install the motherboard. All right, so what we're going to do, we're going to work, basically you're working at a computer store. They just hired you. They just hired you off the streets. Hey, you're a technician. So the customer you have a customer that wants a motherboard with the following features: 16x PCI Express slot, that's a PCIe for video card support, M2 storage support, M.2, whichever way you want to refer to it. A motherboard that supports 64-bit processors, which is pretty much the standard now. You don't really have 32-bit or 16-bit anymore. Matter of fact, you have 128 and 256-bit, but I won't go there. You want dual channel memory support, and you want to make sure that your memory slots can hold up to 64 gigs. So those are the specifications that this customer is looking for. So in this lab, we want to make sure we select and install the motherboard that meets these requirements, and then we want to connect all of this: the power switch, the 3-in-1 pin power LED, the case speaker, the HDD LED, the front fan, the rear fan, the USB connections, USB 2 and USB 3 connections, and then audio. And generally, I can tell you right now, this is the most adventure. If you ordered one of those PC kits, it's always, okay, what do you do with all these connections and where do they go on the motherboard? All right, so here we go. So the first thing that I would recommend, if ever you're dealing with a motherboard, you have to read the specifications. So yes, in our little PC here, our PC slide, we have a blank computer, we have a power supply, but nothing. We have a list of motherboards here, and there's really only one motherboard that will satisfy our requirements. So the thing of it is, go ahead, you don't have to select it, go ahead and click on the details. And basically, yes, you can look at this until you're blue in the face, but you want to select the specifications because it will tell you where everything goes. All right, now if we scroll down on this motherboard, on the specifications, we can see that we have a 12-volt ATX power supply connector. And you see that this motherboard is quite a bit different than the other one. That's number one. Number two is our auxiliary power supply connector. And I'll just go down these. Let me ask you, because you all clicked on this as well. Do you think this motherboard, I'll give you a couple minutes to scan through the specs, does this motherboard fit our criteria? What do you think?
No, it doesn't.
So how many say no?
No.
Nope.
Oh, we get a lot of no's. All right. We don't want that one. How about number two? What do you think? How about number two? Or actually, it may be in a different order. This is the 775. How about the 775? Does that fit our criteria? Floppy.
No.
The consensus is still no.
Still
All
no.
right, we go to the 939. How about that one? Oops. What do you think?
PCI.
It has PCIe. It has 4 slots. Microphone, mouse, keyboard.
Processor.
What do you think about this one? Stacy says no.
No.
What are we missing on this one? It looks pretty good. What are we missing?
To clear CMOS button.
I don't see a USB 3 either.
USB 3, yeah.
Okay,
USB 3.
so that one's out. How about the 462? What do you think about that one? This one has a TV output.
TV output connector.
Ooh, connect that to your TV.
No.
UDP protection LED. It's got a lot of stuff we don't need.
TV output.
And it doesn't have USB 3, does it? See.
With a TV connector. No.
Yeah, I don't. Yeah. Let's see what the audience says no. All right, we're running out of motherboards. How about the AM3? That's an old one. Jeez. What do we think about that one?
I think it's this one.
Who is that?
This is Francisca.
Hey, Francisca. Glad you
Hi.
made it.
Yes, thank you.
All right, Francisca says it's this one. Anyone in agreement?
AM3 CPU, IDE, CPU voltage, USB. Or are the USB?
I don't see any USBs either.
Yeah,
Well, it has one here,
there's one, but not three.
and that's probably USB 2. Usually that's the case.
There's only two.
One. All right, Francisca, I don't think that one's right either. All right. Okay, we're down to the 1366. This one has to be right. What do you think? Everyone's tagging on the USB 3. First,
PCI.
PCI, only USB, which is usually USB 2. So you always say it. Well, since Stacy said no, then I don't think it's that one either. All right, well, we only have one left. So I'm thinking that it has to be this one, right? But let's check it out just to be sure. This is the 1151. We got, right there, USB 3, 3.1, USB 2,
1,
IE,
2,
16.
Express. Yeah.
That looks right.
2 and 3.
All right, let's throw that
That one.
in our PC. That was an arduous process. Now we have to start connecting all the cables. And remember, you have cables from the power supply and cables from the chassis. So once you get that screwed in, our power supply, and we can do the easy one first, since we have a good sense of this 24 pin.
21, 24.
That's easy. And also, we all remember where the CPU is plugged in, right? Up here,
18.
8 pin.
Yeah.
So those are easy. All right. Let's see, what else? So now we need to go to the case. The case has cables that connect to the, this is always fun. Now before I would begin, so you just click on the case itself, and then it will show you the case, all of the connections. And these are our connections. But before you do that, you need to know where they go, right? On the motherboard. So let's go back to our details of our motherboard. No, that's the wrong one. And click on our motherboard, go back to details. If you expand this, go back to the specifications and scroll down. Right here, it gives you an indication of the panel or chassis connections, like the power LED, the power switch, the speakers, and then the HDD LED here in the bottom, and reset, and then your PLED here. You have 2 spots for PLED, which is, we have to figure out which one. Now,
USB 2 and
go
3.
back to the motherboard. Let's zoom in a little bit. You see that our panel connections are down here. You really have to kind of, it says panel. If you scroll in, it says panel right there.
Yeah.
So that's your panel connection. These right here, these pins. All right. So I would recommend to make sure you know which ones go where. If you remember,
The
and
specs.
you go back to the spec sheet of the motherboard, and basically I'm just going to keep mine minimized. And the first thing, well, we have to figure out which PLED we have, either this set or this set. So if we take a look at the chassis, let's move this out of the way, and we look at our power LED, take a look at the details of that, take a look at the front, you see that it's a 3-pin. And it says that it's a 3-1, which means that it's a 3-pin, but only 2 will actually provide the power to that LED. And I'm not going to go into the electronics of it, but if we look at our spec again, we know it goes down here over these 3 connectors. So if we take our PLED, we want to put it right there, right?
Yeah.
Are we good with that? All right. Okay, our power switch, which is here, goes into, we have a power button, ground, these 2 here, right? So that's this one, so it's the second 2, and this is very important, not the first 2, but the second pair. We plug our power switch there, all right? And next we want our case speaker. The speaker's here and it goes across 1, 2, 3, 4. You have your power, your ground, and then your actual speaker. So we look at our speaker, cables here, wait, where are you going? Come back here. So we take our speaker and it goes right up there,
Up.
right there, right?
Yeah.
And the one thing I want you to know is that if that connection's successful, it'll give you the little upwards exclamation message saying that you actually connected it correctly. So keep that in mind. That'll tell you that it is connected correctly. And now we have our HDD LED, and that goes on these 2, right? Right here, right there. So, boom. All right. So we have all our controls for our chassis according to our spec sheet here, and that should not be a problem. And looks like we're successful there. Now we have to figure out where the fans go. So if you look at well, we could even go back to the motherboard details. We go back to the specs. And if you scroll down, these are chassis fans. So if you look through here, it'll tell you that the number 4 is all of your fans, your pump, extension, and your chassis fans. All right. But if you look at here, there's several spots that are number 4.
Yeah.
There, one up here, one over there, one over there. Well, so now we have to go back to the motherboard and kind of hope that it gives us some indication. So we have 2 fans connections here, but that's an external fan and that's 5-pin. That's number 2. We have to look for chassis fans. So you do have to do some investigation. Look here. Here's chassis fan 1, right here, right? So if you look at our chassis fan cables, we have a rear fan and a front fan. I would say that this is the rear fan. So I'm going to connect that rear fan here. And then over here, that's a CPU fan. Nope. You look near the front. Hidden here, close to, there's another chassis fan. Chassis fan 2. So I'm going to call that the front fan and connect that there. All right. So now we have to connect our USB. So you have USB 2 and USB 3. And if you remember from your specs, USB 3 is 9. USB 2 is 14. Here's 9. And you have 2 14 slots for USB 2. All right. So if we go back to our chassis, looking pretty good. Find our USB. Here's our USB 3. That's the big one. Goes there. And our USB 2 is this one. And it goes in one of those. All right. And last, we need to connect our audio. Where the heck is that? Let's take a look. Do we have anything in here that says audio? Where's the audio? Audio. Who knows where the audio is? Oh, someone chimed in the chat. This is a lot like a fuse box. Yep, yes it is. You're absolutely right. It's just as adventurous. So we need to figure out where the audio goes. Someone find the audio. That's your mission. That's our last cable. Where's, oh, number 18, front panel audio connector. 18. And that's
The last one on the
last
bottom.
one. And where's 18? It
Last one on the bottom.
should be right there. Okay. So we know that that's right here. So we take our audio cable and plug, whoop, stop that. Plug it in. All right, are we good then? We get all the cables connected?
Wait, can you show me where the other fan is? So I have the,
Okay,
is it the
so these are
front
passive ones,
front fan?
right here. Right there. You see where that is?
Okay. Thank you.
Oh.
I know.
Yeah. All right, that was a lot of work, right? But essentially, when you deal with motherboards, you have to do that. All right, so we got all our chassis cables in. So we want to connect the power supply, actually get power to the power supply. So the back of our desktop. And oh, wait, am I reading this? Oh, not turning on. You're right. So I'm reading ahead. No, we're just installing the motherboard. So we don't really need to turn it on. We just need to make sure all the cables are connected, and we did that. And we made sure that the power supply connections are connected actually. So let's see how we did. Yay. Yes, it was 11:51, and that was a lot of work.
Oh,
Did everyone do okay then?
what did I miss? Connect system case.
Uh-oh, did you miss some of the connections? Yeah,
My gosh.
yeah, so do it again. You make sure you have to get all the connections right.
Yeah.
All right. All right, let's do Stacy, I just wanted, oh, okay. I tried the lab like 5 times and did not like me. Uh-oh. Uh-oh. Well, I can tell you it's probably that chassis, those chassis connections. If you get one of those wrong, those are pain. It does take, you have to connect them on the right pins on that panel. Just keep trying. You can do this as many times as you want. All right. Okay, but that one will take some practice. I will tell you right now. All right. So let's watch. Uh-oh, now all of a sudden you're not smiling so big. Yeah, yeah, I can remember having to do that over and over, pulling my hair out. But anyway, yes, just make sure those chassis connections can be an absolute nightmare, but it's very, very good practice. All right. All right, so our next video, while you're all still working on that, is 331. And this one, we are going to actually look at motherboard components. This will be very, very good when we begin to troubleshoot motherboards. They're always a lot of fun. All right. And then we'll do one more lab and we'll take a break because I know you'll need it. And then we'll have to power through the other 3 labs. All right. Motherboard components. Here we go.
Components in a computer need to be able to communicate with each other. Data needs to be retrieved from the hard drive. Instructions need to be read from the CPU. Graphic information needs to be sent to the video card. The component that allows all this to happen is the motherboard. In this lesson, we're going to take a look closer at the different parts of a motherboard. Here's a typical ATX motherboard. The first thing we want to look at are all these connection areas. Because every component connects to the motherboard, there's a lot of different connectors. The first one you might notice is the CPU socket here. This is where the CPU is installed. Depending on the type of CPU the motherboard is made for, this socket might look a little different. But for the most part, it's very easy to identify the CPU socket. Next to the CPU socket are the memory slots. This is where the computer's memory modules are installed. 4 memory slots is standard for most motherboards, but some might have more or less. Right here is the ATX power connector for the power supply. And over here is the CPU power connector. This supplies the CPU with additional power. Also on the motherboard are connectors for case fans, which are these pin connectors. Most motherboards have around 3 case fan connectors. In addition, there's a CPU fan connector up near the CPU socket. Even though this uses the same connector as the case fans, it's a bit different. It actually gathers information about the CPU fan, such as its RPM. Over here are the motherboard's expansion slots. This is where expansion boards are installed, which expand the functionality of the computer. Down by the expansion slots are where you'll find the motherboard's front panel connectors. If your case has front panel audio or USB, you connect the cables for them down here. There's also connection areas for the case's buttons and lights. Right here are the SATA connectors. Most new motherboards will have several of these. Their configuration will be different between motherboards. Sometimes the connections are upright and sometimes they are parallel with the board. In addition to all these connectors, motherboards also have integrated flash memory that stores a motherboard's firmware. Motherboards use one of 2 different types of firmware. The first is the Basic Input-Output System, or BIOS. The second is the Unified Extensible Firmware Interface, or UEFI. Over here is the CMOS battery. Older motherboards store BIOS configuration settings in the CMOS chip, which uses volatile memory. The CMOS battery supplies power to this memory so that the settings aren't erased when the computer is turned off. However, modern motherboards actually store the BIOS configuration settings in what's called non-volatile BIOS memory. The CMOS battery on these motherboards is used to retain accurate date and clock times when the computer is unplugged. Another integrated component is the motherboard's chipset. The chipset is responsible for managing communications among the CPU, memory, and various connected components. Motherboards also have integrated peripheral connectors called I/O connectors. The type of connectors here depend on the motherboard. Some motherboards have onboard components such as a network card, video card, or sound card. If this is the case, then those connectors would be here. For example, we know this motherboard has an integrated network card and sound card because of its Ethernet and audio ports. There's one more, often overlooked motherboard component you should know about. Let's flip the motherboard over. Notice the lines that run all over the back here. These are called traces. Remember, motherboards allow all the connected devices to communicate with each other. Those communications are transmitted along these traces, which connect to every chip and connector on the motherboard. As you can see, the motherboard plays a huge role in a computer system. It's where all the computer components connect, including the CPU, memory, hard drives, and expansion boards, and it handles the communications between each of those devices.
Yes, the motherboard is absolutely the,
Like the brain.
yep. Without the motherboard, well, that's your computer. I mean, it what gives you your computer life. The processor is obviously the brain, but the motherboard provides all the communication pieces. Okay, so just I did want to mention, you know that you can click on the videos and it'll provide a list of the text. The term is leaving my head, but, and you can stop and start at any point in the video, review it, read the text, whatever you'd like. And I do recommend that for these videos because they're very, very, very informational. All right, so let's move on to our next lab. And then we'll take a break because I know you all need a brain break. Our next lab is 343. And that's going to be troubleshoot system power. Well, this will be fun.
Dun, 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 dun.
So this is very simple. You work at you're the IT professional at your company. An employee decided to run an update. He started the update, went home, he or she, but then when he came back the next morning, his computer doesn't start. He clicks the start button, doesn't do anything. What do you do? How do you troubleshoot it? So before we go into the lab, let me ask you all, where would you start if you saw that this employee's computer looks like this? The monitor's on, the PC's not on, and when you try to turn it on,
You
Check the power connections.
the
The physical
switch.
connections.
Yeah. Those three.
it says it doesn't turn on. So yes, you want to go underneath the desk or wherever, look at the back of the computer. Well, look at there. Someone unplugged it. Maybe a cleaner or someone. So you're like, wait a minute, it's not plugged in. All right. So you guys are smart. So you go ahead and plug it in. All right. So now it's plugged in. Well, what else do you check?
The voltage, the 110, 220 switch.
No. What else do you check
Yeah.
before? Is the power supply on? Right?
Switch.
Switch the power supply on. And then you can check the voltage. Remember on the power supply, we generally run, well, we always run a 115, 120, and you do have a selection switch on the back of your power supply. And this is a big thing now with power supplies because you can take your PC with you. And in some countries, they do run a 220. So you want to change that switch to 115. Actually, you want to do that before you turn it on. That's all right. So have we troubleshooted the problem? And so let's try it. Hey, look at that. So that one was easy. Basically, there was no power to the power supply. And maybe this particular individual changed out the power supply, or someone did and they just didn't bother to connect it. All right, so there we go. That one was pretty easy. So that gives your brain a break from the crazy motherboard labs. So let's take a 5-minute break. That's all we have tonight. because yes, you get one last night of Adam. So let's just take 5 minutes to stretch a little bit. We'll start again at 6:45.
Days will be harder than others, so we gotta lean on each other. Hands in the air, hearts on our sleeve. Living in a world unfair. Living in a world so scared. I'm gonna be fearless, fearless. I'm brave enough to feel it, feel it. I'm falling down, fearless, fearless. No doubt surrounded, I finally found it. Fearless, fearless. I never thought I'd feel this, feel this. I finally believe it, believe it. No doubt surrounded, I finally found it. Can't be myself if I'm hiding. If I'm not living, I'm dying. I can't feel what I don't know. I'm tearing apart all the labels, throwing my luck on the table. If I lose, I won't go home. Living in a world unfair. Living in a world so scared. I'm gonna be fearless, fearless. I'm brave enough to feel it, feel it. I'm running down my demons, demons. No doubt surrounded, I finally found it. Fearless, fearless. I never thought I'd feel this, feel this. I finally believe it, believe it. No doubt surrounded, I finally found it. Hold it close, don't ever let it go. I can feel the light inside. Hold it up so that everybody knows now is not the time to hide. 'Cause we're living in a world unfair. We're living in a world so scared. I'm gonna be fearless, fearless. I'm brave enough to feel it, feel it. I'm running down my demons, demons. No doubt surrounded, I finally found it. Fearless, fearless. I never thought I'd feel this, feel this. I finally believe it, believe it. No doubt surrounded, I finally found it.
All right. I know that was a quick break, but we have to get right back to work. So you can all impress Adam with your power supply motherboard knowledge. All right, we're going into lab 344, troubleshoot power supply problems. And basically you work at a computer store, a customer brought you in a computer that shuts down before it can complete boot. You suspect that the problem is with the power supply. So this lab, you want to test the power supply, you want to choose a power supply that has the following connectors and 20 plus 4 pin power connector. your CPU 4-pin connector, and your PCIe video card 6-pin. So the customer has expressed interest in new graphics card that requires its own power connector, and that happens quite often. So you want to make sure that the power supply you select will support this card. So you want to install the power supply on the computer, making the follow connections: connect the motherboard, connect the CPU, connect the power connector to the SATA hard drives and optical drive, plug the computer in using the existing power cable into the wall, and then you want to start the computer. All right, here we go. All right. So we know that the computer won't boot up, so always when you're given a situation like this, you want to test the customer's, whatever they're stating, and basically, yes, our computer says we don't work. All right, so let's open it up, and the first thing we suspect that it's the power supply. So we want to remove the power supply from. Now remember, we don't have to remove any chassis cables, but we have to remove the power supply. So what's the first cable we want to remove, or what's the first thing we want to remove to do as far as removing the power supply from the PC chassis?
24 pin.
Wait, we want to make sure everything is off, right?
Oh, yeah.
So basically, we want to unplug it.
Unplug it.
Yeah, even turn it off, right? Okay, now we're in a safe environment. So then we go in. Now we want to remove the 20 plus 4 pin power. What else?
The power on the CPU.
On CPU. What else? Anything else?
The power supply itself.
So now we want to take the power supply out. No, we forgot to do what? We forgot to remove the SATA. Remember the SATA cables?
Oh, yeah, and the drive bay.
Yeah, so we have to go to the drive bay, and we have to disconnect.
Those power thing, yeah. Those
disconnect.
highlighted.
We got the hard drive and the
Oh.
optical drive, right? All right, so now we want to pull that power supply out. Okay, so since we have, this one is exactly like that one, so now we have 2 of those, we can assume that we can replace this one with that SATA ATX, and it has a 20 plus 4 and the PCIe, it even tells you right there.
Yeah.
And then let's just pull that one out, because we threw the other one in the recycle. Okay, so now we want to reconnect everything that we just disconnected. We want to reconnect our 20 plus 4. We want to reconnect our CPU. And this one's a 4-pin. Where is it? Four.
Wait, I'm sorry. Which one did you choose?
Oops, hold on.
IE.
Oops, I took the. All right, so
ATX PCIe.
I chose the 20 plus 4 pin PCIe.
Thank you.
Okay. And I just connected the power. And where's the CPU? Where's our CPU connection at? We have an 8-pin.
No, it's a 4-pin.
Ah, is it a 4-pin? Right there. Yeah. So that's a 4-pin, and it does usually come with a 4-pin or an 8-pin. So we connected our power connector and our CPU. We're going to connect our SATA cables again.
Yeah.
So we'll go back to the drive bays. Make sure you connect
The SATA power.
there and one SATA cable there. All right. So now we want to connect this 6-pin PCI video card, needs power as well. Okay, now where is that? Who can tell me where the PCI card is?
The slots, oh, the white one, that one.
This one right here.
Yeah.
Whoops. Let me put the card back in. All right, now, does that have a connector?
No, the PCI.
So we need to connect, there's a special graphics card now that has a 6-pin connector that we need to connect from the power supply. That's a modem. That's not our graphics card.
Oh,
So where's our graphics card?
graphics card.
Remember, this customer expressed an interest in a new graphics card that requires its own power. So, and make sure the power supply we select can support this card. First of all, where, if it's a, okay, we know what PCI slots are. Is that in one of our PCI slots?
Yeah.
Are you sure? That's a TV tuner, and that's a modem. And these are the PCI slots. So where's this special graphics card?
I think we don't have it here.
We don't have it there.
We don't have it.
It's not any of those. So it must
I
be.
think we just needed to make sure that that it could expand to fit it. I don't think we have to add.
Is that Stacy?
Yes.
Okay. So yes, he's expecting us to have, make sure that our power supply will have that capability. So let's check our cables. We do have a connector power for just apply a 6-pin PCIe, okay?
Yeah.
That's the key. We have this cable here, so whoever buys that special graphics card, which is probably $1,000, we can provide power to it. All right?
Yes.
So we know that we have the right power supply, and we connected the SATA cables. So now we want to power this thing up to make sure it works. So we go to the back again, and we re-plug our plug back in. We turn our power supply on. All right. We know it's on 115. Yep. All right. Let's see if the computer will work. Hey, look at that. Looks like it's booting up. All right. Any questions? All right, let's score our lab. We did great. Okay. And now what do we have? For our next magic trick, we're going to watch a video. And the video is 351. Processors. Oh boy, now we go to CPUs. I bet you're excited about that.
So excited.
All right. Share my screen. And I got other students texting me. Sorry about the dings. All right. So we're going to video 351, processor concepts. This one is actually very, very good. So please pay attention.
In this lesson, we're going to spend some time discussing the brains of any computer system, and that's the central processing unit, which we call the CPU or processor. Let's begin this lesson by discussing the role and function of the CPU. The CPU is an integrated circuit that's built on a slice of silicon and contains millions of microscopic circuits called logic gates. They're all connected by hairline strands of aluminum that work together to store and manipulate data. A CPU can accept instructions or programs and execute those instructions to perform both arithmetic and logical operations. These instructions may tell the CPU to perform tasks. It could prompt the user to enter a series of numbers, read the input from the system keyboard as the user types them, store those numbers in specific memory locations in the system RAM, use arithmetic functions to add all of those numbers together, and then write the result to a new location in the system RAM. Write a message on the screen explaining the result, and then open a file on the hard drive and write the result to that file, or to save the file and then close it. So, when we say the CPU is the brains of the computer, we really aren't kidding. Without a CPU, none of the other components in the system would be able to do anything. The CPU connects to the rest of the system using a special socket on the motherboard. This socket contains a series of many small connectors into which you plug the CPU. And by doing this, electric connections are established with the motherboard bus, which in turn connects the CPU to other components in your system, like the system RAM, your storage devices, your video interface, and other expansion cards that are installed in the expansion slots. You also need to be familiar with the CPU's clock speed. The clock speed identifies the rate at which the CPU can execute instructions. The clock speed is measured in gigahertz. The CPU requires a fixed number of clock ticks to execute each instruction. Generally speaking, the faster the CPU's clock speed, the more instructions it can execute per second. The clock speed is very important. Understand that for all components connected to the motherboard to communicate with each other, such as the RAM, the CPU, and the expansion cards, the components must be synchronized to the same clock. Therefore, your CPU's clock speed must be supported by the motherboard, and vice versa. With that in mind, we need to talk about overclocking. Beware that, with most systems, the CPU, the RAM, and the motherboard can be overclocked to a degree. Overclocking is pushing a CPU beyond its design specifications. You can gain a marginal increase in performance by doing this. Intel's Turbo Boost technology allows the processor to dynamically run above its rate speed. It also allows the CPU to overclock as needed. Overclocking basically increases the speed that the clock runs. Because the clock runs faster, the CPU, the memory, and the motherboard all run faster too. In theory, this provides better performance. However, beware that the improved performance comes at a price. Overclocked systems tend to run much hotter and consume more electricity, and the increased temperature can significantly reduce the lifespan of the CPU, as well as the other components in the system. In addition, if you push the CPU too fast, you'll probably experience system instability. So you must decide whether the increased performance is worth the shortened lifespan of the device, as well as the potential instability of the system overall. With that in mind, let's shift gears and talk about CPU cache memory. The important thing to understand here is that the CPU has its own built-in memory. We call it the CPU cache. CPU cache is different from system RAM. The CPU cache is made up of static random access memory chips, or SRAM, which are very fast. In fact, they're much faster than the DRAM chips that system RAM chips are made from. The CPU cache is used to store a copy of frequently accessed information from the system RAM. This can significantly increase performance. With this in mind, let's talk about the concept of a core. In early CPUs, there was one processor within each CPU package. In other words, it only had a single core. If you wanted really great performance from a computer system, you could purchase a special motherboard that had 2 or more CPU sockets, allowing you to implement multiple CPUs at the same time. Today, however, most CPUs have multiple processors or cores within the same CPU package. Implementing multiple cores dramatically improves the system performance. The key thing to remember is that a multi-core CPU can execute more than one instruction at a time. For example, if you have 4 cores within your CPU, each core can execute an instruction concurrently. So, instead of processing just one single instruction, the CPU can execute 4 instructions at the same time. In addition to multiple cores, some CPUs also support multi-threading. Multi-threading allows a single core within a CPU to execute 2 instructions at the same time. Multi-threading can also increase system performance, especially if it's implemented within a multi-core CPU. For example, if you have a CPU that has 4 cores and each one of those cores is a multi-threading core, that CPU can run 8 instructions concurrently. Some CPUs also support hyper-threading. In 2002, Intel introduced the hyper-threading technology. This technology is owned by Intel. Hyperthreading is a form of simultaneous multi-threading technology. With hyperthreading, one physical core appears to the operating system as two processors. This allows one core to process two instructions at the same time. The two processes can also use the same resources. So if resources for one process are available, then another process can continue if its resources are available. Hyperthreading gives you about a 20% increase in performance. Hyperthreading is not to be confused with multi-core or multi-threading technology. There's always a wide variety of CPUs available to you, and some are better for creating graphics, crunching numbers, playing games, and so on. A GPU, or graphics processing unit, is a programmable logic processor specialized for display functions. The GPU renders images, animations, and video for the computer's screen. GPUs are located on plug-in cards, in a chipset on the motherboard, or on the same chip as the CPU. If it's on the same chip as the CPU, it's called an integrated GPU. Let's discuss virtualization technology. Virtualization is the ability to install and run multiple operating systems simultaneously on a single physical machine. Let's say we have a data center with 4 servers and 4 physical platforms, each running an application. There's a database server, an application server, an email server, and a file server. Now, suppose we combine these services virtually onto one server platform. These servers still exist, but they exist as virtual machines running under a single host OS on a single hardware platform. That's the concept of virtualization. The virtual machines appear as self-contained and separate physical systems. Each virtual machine looks and acts like a traditional computer system. If your computer will be used as a virtualization system, then you need to make sure that the CPU you want to implement supports virtualization. Now, let's discuss cooling. When you work with modern CPUs, you have to keep cooling foremost in your mind. Sometimes people turn their systems on for testing purposes without the CPU cooler installed. This is a bad idea because modern CPUs generate a lot of heat. Heat is bad for your computer systems. An uncooled CPU will burn up in less than a minute. CPUs use a heatsink, fan, thermal paste, liquid, or fanless cooling systems to transfer heat from the CPU to the cooling unit. Install a heatsink and fan before you ever turn the system on. There are several different CPU cooling options available. The first one is to use a heatsink. This can be a more passive form of CPU cooling. The heatsink makes physical contact with the CPU, which essentially increases the CPU's surface area, allowing more heat to be dissipated. A heatsink alone can't adequately cool a CPU. If you're going to use a heatsink, then you should always use it in conjunction with a fan. The fan blows air over the heatsink to increase the airflow. By doing this, we remove more heat from the heatsink more quickly. This is an example of active cooling. Another option available to you is to use heat pipes. Heat pipes are usually implemented in conjunction with a heatsink. The heat pipes are filled with a liquid that absorbs heat from the CPU. As they do, liquids within the pipe evaporate. Because that vapor is less dense than the liquid around it, it rises towards the heatsink on the other end of the heat pipe. Then the heatsink and a fan cool the vapor, causing it to condense back into a liquid. When it does, it drops back down to the CPU on the other end of the heat pipe. The system keeps cycling that way to remove heat from the CPU. This system is usually much more efficient at cooling the CPU than the traditional heatsink and fan, and it's a good example of active cooling. There's a fourth option available that's more expensive and not as widely implemented, the radiator. This option uses a coolant, a fan, a pump, and a radiator, much like your car's cooling system. The coolant cycles through the system, exchanging heat from the CPU to the radiator, where it's dissipated by the fan. No matter which cooling option you use, you need to make sure that you use thermal paste. Thermal paste is critical because it facilitates heat transfer from the CPU to the CPU cooler. With all of this information in mind, let's end this lesson by discussing several key criteria to remember when you're selecting an appropriate CPU in a new implementation. First, you need to identify the purpose of the system. You need to be sure that the CPU you select can perform the task that you want the system to perform. Also, you need to make sure that the CPU is supported by the motherboard. 2 considerations need to be taken into account. First of all, is the CPU compatible with the socket on the motherboard? And second, will the motherboard's BIOS or UEFI firmware support that CPU? A CPU may fit into a socket, but that doesn't mean the motherboard itself will support it. You also need to identify the appropriate CPU speed. However, Don't rely solely on the CPU's clock speeds when you're making comparisons between processors. There are many other factors that need to be taken into account, such as the CPU architecture, the number of cores, whether multi-threading is supported, and the amount of cache memory that has been implemented with the CPU. One way to get around this is to use websites such as cpubenchmark.net. These websites objectively assign a benchmark score to your CPUs that allow you to compare to see which one is the fastest. You also need to take cost into account when you're selecting a CPU. You need to decide how much performance you need versus how much money you're willing to spend. Generally speaking, CPUs that are manufactured by Intel tend to provide the best performance, but they also come at a premium price. CPUs manufactured by AMD, on the other hand, tend to be much less expensive, but they also don't perform quite as well. So you must make that choice between cost and performance. And that's it for this lesson. In this lesson, we introduced you to the CPU. We talked about the role and function of the CPU, clock speeds, overclocking, cache memory, multi-cores, multi-threading, and hyper-threading. Then we talked about virtualization, cooling, and the factors you should keep in mind when selecting a CPU.
All right. Let's see. So we're almost out of time, but we have time for our last quick lab on CPU. So I'm pretty sure Adam will wait a few minutes because and what I'll do on the lesson plan, you notice that we do have a couple more processor exercise. I'll save those for next week. So don't panic. All right. So that said, let's go right into 357. Okay, in this lab, we're going to select and install a processor. You work for a computer repair store, and you're building a new computer for a customer. You have already installed the motherboard in the system kit, and now you need to select the processor. So you need to use the following criteria: install the fastest processor with the largest cache supported by the motherboard, connect the correct heat sink and fan, and then connect the heatsink and fan power cable to the motherboard. All right. So we want the fastest processor supported by the motherboard. So if we take a look at our motherboard here, and let's just briefly take a look at the details here and the specs. You always want to take a look at the specifications for your motherboard. And you know this, as far as the CPU, it says the motherboard comes with a surface mount LGA 1366 socket designed for Intel i7. So you know this motherboard will support an i7, which is pretty high on the Intel side. Intel actually has i9s now, but i7 with the 4 quad cores, that's the ticket. So we know we can get away with selecting an i7. So we have an AMD, we have an i7 here with 4 megs of cache. We have a dual core, Intel Core 2. We have an i7, 975, 3.33 gigs, 8 megs of cache. That, I think I like that. So basically we're going to select that one and install it onto our motherboard. And basically it has clasp and locks, and you have to be very careful because it has very delicate pins. So you essentially very lightly push it in and lock it into place. All right, so I think we have the correct processor. Now we need to select a heat sink and fan, and lo and behold, we have one that actually matches to a 775, which was the processor. So I'm comfortable with adding that one to our, but it's not liking it. Why not? And maybe it's not compatible. Why not? All right. All right. So we take our heat sink and we. Oh, it says we
I
can-
tried the 1366 and it fit. So
Well, thank you. So obviously the 775 doesn't fit. Well, that's an AMD. All right, so now we have our CPU and our fan connected. So we need to connect wait, connect the heatsink and fan power cable to the motherboard. It's already connected. So what else do we need to do here?
The power.
The power from what? From the mother? For the no, no. For what? For what component?
Oh, for the fan.
So this, where do we connect our fan power?
On the top,
Oops.
where the white thing near those circle.
So is it going?
Oh, on the right. There you go. This white square. No, on the right. There you go.
Right there, right?
Yeah.
All right. So now we have power to our fan and our CPU automatically. What's connected? Anything else we need to do for this lab? Are we good?
We're good.
All right. Yes, all good. So the one thing that you want to do, just the lesson here, one, be very careful with your heat sinks. And usually, as I said from the very top, check your connectors. Check the connectors on the motherboard. You can look at the specification and make sure you can match that with the connectors on the devices. All right? Okay, so let me stop sharing here. And I have to let Adam take control. I know you all can't wait, right? He can't wait. He's speechless,
Thank you.
which is different.
I am.
Say something, Adam.
I was trying to be respectful of your time, man.
All right, let me make you the ultimate leader. There you go. Okay, thank you all. Once again, we had just before I relinquish control, we had a couple. I'm just going to push those to next week. As far as the homework, you have until Friday to complete those. If you're having any issues, please let me know, and I will include that in my report. All right. Thank you all. I will still be here to bug you, so I'll jump in when Adam is getting too crazy.
Yeah, that might happen quickly.
All right.
Just kidding. It is the last night of class, so I know. Everybody stop crying. It's okay. We'll be together again at some point, maybe. But it is my last night of the workshop. We're going to jump in, but I'm going to give you, because you just finished, let me give you just maybe 3-4 minutes to use the restroom, get a drink of water, stretch, cry to your spouse, whatever you got to do. What's up, Robert? Hey, Danielle. Bless you.
Thank you.
They're not here yet?
What's up?
They're not here yet?
They are.
Oh,
I'm
they
just
are.
giving everybody a couple minute break to get water, and then we will start at like 7:18.
More minutes.
Hey, Melba. Sorry, I was writing an email. I'm good. I'm good. James is getting upset over there. It's all right, buddy. I made the mistake of checking my email right before I log in, and that's always a problem because then there's like 10 emergencies that aren't really emergencies. Ain't life an adventure, guys. Ain't life an adventure. I know James is always excited. I wish I could be as excited as James. In that pretty pink room. I like it. Is that your green screen?
My niece. Room.
Your niece. Your niece.
Yeah.
Dude, do real men like pink? It's okay.
No. It's, we're on like my wife works as a nurse, so she's doing some quarantine.
Oh, and you're trying to hide out in the kids' room.
Yeah, he had a patient with COVID patient, so
Yep.
he needs to isolate herself too.
Yep, I get it. Pink used to be associated with boys and blue for girls, Jackie says. Yeah, I get it. One of my favorite colors is actually lavender, which is kind of funny. I just have always liked it. So it's also my mom's favorite color, so I'm a little bit of a mom's boy. All right, so we are going to jump in. We'll get started, and then other people can jump in when they can. We have the rest of the class to work through, but it's not a ton of stuff, so we're not going to be overwhelmed tonight. Last week, we finished up talking about interviewing, which was good. And this week, we're going to close talking about goal setting and boundaries and some really healthy things that I think are vital, not only for our personal success, but also for our professional success. So we're going to kind of take the long round way to talk about that. So we'll jump in and get started. Again, as always, feel free to jump in with your mic, or you can jump in with the chat. That's fine. I'm going to share my screen, and I will have my chat open. So either way is good with me. All right. So let's start with career exploration. In this workshop, we're actually going to look at understanding customer expectations. We already did a little bit of that, so we aren't going to spend a ton of time on it. We are going to talk about organizational culture. That can be really unique and different depending on what we're looking for. We're going to talk about leadership styles, the difference between managers and leaders, and then we'll talk a little bit about creating a healthier learning environment. So we talked on Monday about customer expectations. So we don't need to hit that hard because we already kind of jumped around and talked about it. Have you noticed that you've gotten better or worse customer service during COVID, during Corona? Have you guys gotten better or worse customer service?
If we're talking, this is Danielle, by the way. So if we're talking as I'm the associate and I get people coming in, people are mean.
Okay. Yeah.
People are really mean. Like no matter what the situation, you don't bring in your attitude or your problems into a workplace because the people working there don't want to deal with what you're going through as well.
Right.
So, but yeah, I have come across some very rude people.
Okay.
I'd say worse, especially by like if you're calling, I don't know, your cell phone company or cable or internet, because a lot of them are working from home right now, and it just seems like they maybe eased up on the customer experience or customer service portion of it, and yeah, I think a lot of them are kind of unprofessional. At least what I've experienced.
Yeah, it's been really interesting to me because I always felt like tragedy and trauma bonded people together. And I think it might still do that sometimes. But in this instance, I don't feel like it really has. In fact, it's made it seem almost more individualistic, right? It's almost like I want to be okay. Forget you, forget what you need. So I'm just going to take care of myself. I remember right after 9/11, everybody was kind of a little bit closer. People were more helpful. I mean, I think there were still some other things happening that maybe weren't great. And maybe I'm remembering it with rose-colored glasses, but it definitely felt more like we were bonding. Now, I'm not saying this is like 9/11 at all. What I am saying is it's another crisis. And it definitely feels like people are willing to trip me in the parking lot for my toilet paper. You know? It definitely feels a little bit more like every man for himself, which is sad. I was hoping it would be a little different. Now it sounds like Dwight hates people regardless of what's going on. So crisis or no crisis, don't look for him to share his toilet paper. No way. Just kidding. He said, accept students. And I said, that's not what you said yesterday. Just kidding. We didn't talk yesterday. I just find it interesting that we have had worse customer service. And I don't mean from necessarily even companies. I also have tried to be, if I do go out to eat or if I order Uber Eats, I actually tip more than I normally do because I feel like other people are treating them poorly. So it's really interesting this time right now. So I get it. I feel like it's been about the same for me, Stacey. Okay, well, that's good. Just wait till you go back to school, and then we'll see how that goes.
Haha, the kids are already rude before that, so it's fine. No, but like I think it's a little different. I don't know, maybe it's just my personality because like when I go out or when I do try to interact with people who are, you know, working those either essential jobs or those the
like Starbucks.
Yeah, I mean, I try to be maybe more polite or, you know, just kind of empathize with maybe their situation and realize the fact that I may be the only person who might say thank you in the entire day or try to make them laugh or something like that. So
I'm with you, Stacey. I've gone above and beyond what I would normally do because I want to make sure they know that I appreciate that they are out here. Some of them working harder than they were 6 months ago because of everything that's going on.
Yeah.
And there is something in the air, right? There is some kind of like tension that's going on that we can all kind of feel. So I definitely understand that there's a lot happening. Okay, I just was taking a poll, just talking about customer service. I think now is a good time to really be mindful of what we're saying, how we're saying it, how we treat people when we're going out. So I definitely think that's important right now.
And to kind of just add on to that, I think a lot of people are hiding behind the masks kind of in both sides. So there's that nonverbal communication that we don't see.
Mhm.
So a lot of expression is coming from the eyes. And I think without seeing your actual mouth, you might not process what the eyes are saying. And so it may be perceived as, negative customer service, or I'm being rude or whatever, but maybe my eyes are watery, or, maybe there is anxiety because you feel suffocating, in a mask that's maybe too tight or doesn't fit properly or whatever the case is. And with it being hot and everybody's sweaty, it's kind of a combination of everything.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. I mean, listen, I haven't had to shave my nose hairs in like weeks because that mask goes right over it and nobody has to see it. So it's been awesome. But at the same time, you're right. You don't, sorry, that's probably more to TMI. But also you're right. I don't get to see the smiles. I don't get to see people's reactions when I talk. So that's why I'm trying to say words louder, because it's also really hard to talk through fabric. So I have to talk louder, but then I also have to be overly nice in my tone and my volume and the way I'm speaking, because I want them to know that it's okay. Yeah, Melba, exactly. It can be uncomfortable feeling with the mask on. Hiding, yeah, metaphorically and literally. You're exactly right, Dwight. There's something about putting something in front of our face that changes things fundamentally. I was at a shop today talking, and she had a plexiglass and a mask on and was trying to talk to me. And I'm like, I feel like my grandfather. I didn't know what she was trying to, we have to like yell at each other, which is different, right? It's not the same. And so it can be a little uncomfortable. Yeah. And then of course I try to turn into a joke so that it didn't feel weird that I kept answering the question wrong. All right. So if we look at, we can continue talking about that throughout, but I do want to jump into this idea of organizational culture. We're going to look at different types of culture and how organizations are set up. So I like this model because this model talks about the focus of a business and the structure of a business or an organization. I say business, but I mean organization. So if a organization is stable or flexible, and then if a organization is inward focused or outward focused. So if we look at this right here, a company that is an organization that is super stable and super inward focused, they have a high degree of hierarchy. We call it a hierarchy. And that means they favor structure and control, coordination and efficiency, stability, timeliness, smooth process. So what organization do you think falls in that category?
Military?
So what? What'd you say, James?
On the military.
Exactly. You nailed it. The military, right? The U.S. Army, the Marines, the Air Force, they favor structure and control. They are not outward focused, right? They are inward focused. You can't even get on base without special ID. So they're definitely not out for like, how does our clients feel situation, right? Doesn't matter how we feel. It's about what do we need to do? How can we get there? What's the most efficient? If we don't have a road, we build a road. I mean, it is, that's who I think of when I think of this hierarchy. So if we go up and we use the word that they are, the organization is highly flexible, but they're still inward focused. It's this idea of a clan, and a clan is values oriented. They believe in participation, communication. It's kind of a personal space. It feels like a family. There's nurturing, tight social networks. So what would you see is a organizational culture as a clan? What type of organization would you say is a clan?
Small business?
Is this thing working?
Oh, yeah, it is.
Small business? Okay. It could be I would actually say not a small business, but a family-owned business, right? Like a mom and pop shop where you walk in and you know people by name, that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Polylot, Google might be there. I would actually put them somewhere else personally. Any other? So this is actually where I put things like nonprofits, right? Or like a religious community would be in this area. They're inward focused because they have membership, right? But there's also this idea of flexible. They also care about other people. They are willing to help others. They are tight knit. They have values focus.
Yeah.
So I think, actually, to be honest with you, nonprofits kind of fall in the middle right here between clan and adocracy. But I definitely think that they lean towards clanship. I think religious communities definitely are a clan. If we look at adocracy, that's this idea of being dynamic, entrepreneurial. There's people who take risks. They value innovation and adaptability. They have cutting edge services or products. What type of organization is in adocracy?
Democracy. Dynamic, entrepreneurial people take risk.
Mm-hmm.
Growth, innovation, cutting edge services, or
Robert says Amazon. Okay. Melba says medical field. Hollylot says realtors, brokers. So definitely like real estate agents, I could see that. In brokers, I could see that. Because you kind of have to drum up your own business, especially in Arizona, where I can throw a rock and hit 5 real estate agents. This is definitely where I think of things like startups, like a startup tech company would be this. Also, networking, multi-level marketing or networking companies like my friends who sell oils and try to get me to sell them with them, or the Candle Rep or the Rapid people or whatever else is out there, right? That is definitely more entrepreneurial. You got to work from home. You have to have a drive, all that. Tesla, I would actually say no, Amanda. I would say no. And I'll tell you guys why in a second. I would say Amazon, Google, Tesla would actually be more of a no. And I'd actually say the medical field is almost more of a hierarchy because there's a chain of command that you have to follow, kind of like education. You know what I mean? Lawyers, attorney. I would actually say, Hollylot, that's going to be in this last category here, which is market. Market is kind of what we think of when we think of traditional businesses. They're results oriented. They want to get the job done. They do have values, but they have competition, and it's customer driven and it's achievement driven. So that's definitely going to be lawyers when you can call 5 million different ones that are competing for your business. Amazon is competing for my business, right? Google is competing, although they may not be competing that well. I don't know who they're competing against. Mozilla Firefox, I guess. I don't know. But Safari, I don't know if it's much competition, but in theory, they are market driven. I always think of entrepreneurial as like a really small group of people who are trying to fight for business, whereas a market, you typically already have business coming to you. Like if I owned a cupcake shop, people want cupcakes. They come to me. So that's just a market, right? Chick-fil-A, Matt, perfect. That would be a market. They're outward focused. They're looking at the client, but they're also pretty stable. They have 1 product or 5 products that they do well, and they just keep doing it. Whereas at the adocracy, you have flexibility and you're focused on people. So you're always changing. You're always changing. You're trying this. That didn't work. You try this. That didn't work. You try that. That didn't work. Danielle, I feel like you just said a swear word. So we should probably stop right now. Because we all know Dutch Bros is trash.
Yeah. No.
Yes. Dutch Bros is in the market against real coffee shops.
They do
like
really well.
Everywhere else.
I don't see as big as of a line at Starbucks as I do Dutch Bros.
because they're really fast, and Dutch Bros is really slow and terrible. So yeah, that's probably why. And you can't go in. Have you ever been inside of a Dutch Bros? No, because you can fit a half a person in there. And I know it's a half a person because they're leaning out the window halfway into my car. No.
No, I'll always go for Dutch Bros over Starbucks.
You're not leaning in my car and give me a hug. I'm trying to order a coffee. Don't touch me. I want my coffee. You and your little teeny boppers can go give my dog a milk bone later. Just calm down. Just kidding. I'm just teasing you, Danielle. Yes, that would be a market. Wow, this escalated quickly. Woo. And yeah, it is Melba, here's what's interesting about Starbucks is until Starbucks went kind of global, people thought the price of coffee that really there was just diner coffee, Circle K coffee. There was still other types of coffee, but they were kind of more like European. They were more fancy. And then when Starbucks started selling $6 coffees and everybody thought, oh, people are actually going to buy this, then the market for coffee blew up, right? Then we started seeing all these coffee shops, show up everywhere. And so it is really interesting to see that the market, whenever we're outward focused, but we provide a stable, always the same type of service, how that can actually explode into a whole new different market. Yeah, it's interesting. So where would you say you prefer to fall? Where do you like to be in this chart? Do you prefer a clan? Do you prefer a market? Do you prefer an adocracy, a hierarchy? Maybe it's adhocracy, but I'm pretty sure it's adocracy. Adhocracy? I don't know. Matt prefers a hierarchy. Why? You just like to know what's expected of you?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, I just always kind of been that way. Very simple, and just I like to know what the job is and just pretty much just do it. Not guess, you know what I mean? Not assume.
Right. Were you in the military?
No, I probably should have been though.
No. I get it. But I understand. Like, there's something about having people have clarity of mission, right? They have a clear mission. There's no guessing. There's no assumptions. There's something really kind of attractive about that, which is great. Dwight says, I'm an outlier outside of the boxes. You're down here. You're unstable, and there's no other thing than inward and outward. A little from each, in between hierarchy, in between clan and adocracy. Yep. Yeah, Danielle, ex-military spouse, exactly. I'm a dreamer, so I love this. I love to play in this area of entrepreneurial and taking risks. But to be honest with you, that's not always helpful, right? Walking into a business as a consultant and saying, guys, do you know what we can do here? We can change everything. And that businesses don't always appreciate that. So yeah, this is where I like to live, but I end up living closer to the market. Hierarchy for you, Sal. Yep. Adhocracy. Yep. Ad hierarchy. Exactly. Ad hierarchy right there in the middle. That's all right. You guys can be wherever you want to be. So when we're talking about learning and development, and we're talking about how we learn best, I have to be really honest with you. The way we're teaching you this class is probably not the best way to learn it, but we're kind of at a situation where there's not really another way to do it right now, for as cheap as we can and as efficient as we can. So we're doing the best we can, but I'll tell you, most of the time, about 70% of what you learn is on the job experience. It's actually touching, holding, creating. I always did a lot better when I had people that would show me in person and then hand it to me and let me figure it out. When I got a job, I got transferred to a department at Bank of America where I was working in downtown Phoenix at the large currency reporting unit. And I made my boss, whenever I had to call different people, I hated the phone. So I made her go to another cubicle and I would call her and I would practice the conversations I was about to have with a banking center on the phone with her first before I did it. because I love this practice. For me, it made it so much easier to learn. Melba says she's a visual learner. I get it. We all have different styles, but I'm going to tell you, until we do it, sometimes we don't really have that put into our brain. What they say is
enhanced learning.
Yeah, hands-on. Yep, you got it. Yep. So what they say is that the most senses that you use, the more it's imprinted into your brain. So if you use the 5 senses are touch, smell, hear, see, taste, right? So the more of those you can experience, the more it's imprinted into your brain. It's really hard to taste on the job experience, or professional development. So the other ones are we're kind of left to touching, reading, listening, and all those other things. So for me, it's important to have as many of that as possible because it represents about 70% of what we retain. 20% of what we retain has to do with this idea of mentoring and coaching. So having someone who's with us saying, hey, I can help you, or if you have questions, let me know. That's a really great way to do it. Visual, hands-on for me, how it's always been. Yep, I get it, Danielle. 10% is this formal classroom, formal learning and reading. So thinking you're just going to read and then you're going to get it, that only represents about 10% of what we can retain. So we really need to pair some of these things together. I was going to Italy to visit a friend, and she gave me her Italian for Dummies book. So when I got to Italy, she said, do you know Italian now? And I said, reading a book? I didn't retain any of that. I had to practice with people. I had to mess up. I had to guess while I was there, and I still don't know Italian. So, yeah. All right, so if we jump to this idea of leadership, I like us talking about this because I do think that sometimes we, we want a job, we want to interview well, but we don't ever think even 2 or 3 steps above that. So what I want, especially from this workshop, this class, is that you're thinking long-term. You're not just thinking, hey, I want to get a job in the IT field. No. I want to get a job in the IT field, and then I want to grow to this. I want you to think a couple steps ahead because I think it's good practice for our mind to view that. It's this idea of when we break a board with our fist, we don't look at the board, we look past the board. And so it's the same idea, right? We want to look past what we want so that we already are going to crush those other things, those other steps along the way that get us there. So when we talk about being a role model and modeling leadership, even though you may not be in leadership right now, it's definitely something you want to start thinking about today. Does that make sense? So modeling leadership is this idea that recognizing that you set the example. So many of us, and think about the last leader you had, would you want to follow them, whether they were your boss or not? Setting an example is huge. I don't want to follow people that I don't respect or aren't willing to do the hard stuff that I'm doing or aren't willing to get their hands dirty. So for me, setting the example is important. I had principals when I worked in education that would jump in my class and they would help me teach a class if I had to go somewhere. That's the kind of leader I wanted. I didn't want a principal who was uncomfortable in a classroom. God, that's crazy to me. So yeah. Also, this idea of modeling leadership has to do with utilizing strengths. I think a lot of times we focus on working on our weaknesses. And I'm sure you heard me say this before, but if you work on your weakness, you only get a strong weakness. So really focusing on those strengths to compensate for those weaknesses is actually much more key. Active listening skills. We've talked about a little bit about active listening, but there's different levels. The first step in listening is just hearing. And there are times when you just need to hear people. When do you think you don't need to active listen? When do you think it's okay to just hear?
Most of the time.
Angel.
90 cents.
Wow.
But it's nonsense.
When it's nonsense. Okay.
Sometimes they would speak without anything, especially the gossip thing.
Okay.
I don't like.
Yeah, totally. When it's stuff that doesn't have to do with the job. Yep. How about when the stakes are really low? That's when it's okay to hear. When we have really low stakes, when it doesn't, there's nothing dependent on me responding to this. So sometimes I will actually preface this. People will come up, and I've talked about this before, but I'll just reiterate it. People will come and say, hey, can I talk to you? And I'll say, hey, can I keep working on this while you're talking, or do you need my full attention? And that's just a way for me to say, can I just hear you, or do I need to listen to you? And that's really a strong distinction. And most of the time people say, you know what, it's okay, just hear me. Or, no, I need your full attention, I want your opinion. So there's different levels of listening. And the first one is hearing, but the last one is this active listening, right? Where we're summarizing, we're repeating back to them, we're giving them advice. So we really have to determine, because if you're active listening all day, that's exhausting. No one can do that. It's really tiring. Coaching based on individual need. So knowing what everyone in your department needs and then giving them coaching based on that, that's huge. If you can do that as leadership, people will feel valued around you. Effective communication skills, that's what we've been teaching and talking about. Is there any other thing that you would add to this list for how to model leadership? Bueller, anybody? You think that's a good list? That's fine. I made it, so I just know there's always room for growth. All right. So some effective leadership behaviors. How to be a leader to everyone? Question mark. Amanda says. Well, here's the challenging part, is that you're going to have a leadership style, and there will be people who respond well to that style and people who don't respond well to that style. So it's not about trying to be the same leader to everybody. It's about being a strong leader the best you can in the best way that you're doing it. And knowing that some people may not, you can't please everyone. They may not be happy with how you lead them. So you just kind of have to do the best you can with what you've got. That's what I mean by having a strength and really relying on your strengths. Because if one of your weaknesses is communicating with people, then how can you empower somebody in your group who has it as a strength to do that on your behalf? So there's other ways to work around it. But I do think that you can't do everything for everyone. That's what burns people out. And that's why Dwight hates people. I'm guessing. I don't know. Some of our effective leadership behaviors, the way we can lead by example, is by inspiring the vision. So do you guys know the difference between, or let me ask you, what's the difference between a vision and a mission? Most companies have a vision statement and a mission statement. What's the difference? What is the difference? I'll wait. The difference between a mission and a vision.
Would it be vision long-term, mission short-term?
It could be. Yeah, that could be. Yeah. Pete says vision is the overall picture. Mission is acting on the vision. Mission is what you're going to do to fulfill your vision. Yep. Stacy says vision is where you want to see yourself. Mission is what you plan on doing. Did you guys already have this class? Those are exact definitions. Yeah, that's great. You're exactly right. Vision is this overarching theme, right? So I would say Google. Everyone's Googling it. You guys, come on, man. You don't need to be Googling it. The vision is I want audiences to laugh, reflect, and grow. That's my vision for my company. But my mission is how I do it, right? It's the hands and the feet of my vision. It's the physical part of my vision. It should be what someone who laughs, reflects, and grow, what do they look like? That's my mission. I semi-teach that stuff to high school. There you go, Stacy. There you go. You should maybe teach it all the way. Just kidding. Modeling the way. So this idea that we model how to do it. We act out the vision. We act out the mission. Nobody likes leadership who does the opposite of what the company stands for, right? None of us want to follow that person. That can be very frustrating. Challenge the status quo. So we're not just happy with things as they are. We want to push people to advance. We want to push people to try things that they haven't tried before. This is really important. Encouraging the heart. So this idea that you actually care about, you're passionate. There's a little bit of a passion that you carry through with your job. And then enabling others to act. This is really big. There's a lot of us who are perfectionist, and we don't want other people to do jobs because we're worried that we're the only ones who do it right. I'm not trying to call anybody out, but I'm just saying in general. My father's owned a construction company for 40 years. And let me tell you, he won't hire anyone else to work with him because he wants to do it his way. That's fine. So, but there is power in leadership when you enable and you empower someone to try something, to act when they do it on your behalf. That can actually be a really freeing thing for people, and it can be really healthy. So this enabling others to act is huge, huge. And you know what? You may not do it as well as they do, but that's how you learn. I tell people all the time, they say, well, if I have them do it, they're going to do it wrong. And I say, so what? So what if it's wrong? Then we show them how to do it the right way, but we keep enabling people to do it. That's how you build leaders. I agree, Amanda. It involves a lot of trust. A lot of trust, which is hard. It's hard to come by trust these days. Some other leadership tips would be things like understanding roles and responsibilities. So knowing who does what where. Making sure you set clear expectations. That involves having pre-conversations, right? We might have to have conversations first about what we're looking for so we can make sure that we are getting it. Positive attitude. So make sure that we are doing things in a positive way. People don't want to follow negative Nellies, negative Nancy, poor Nellies and poor Nancy's. We don't want to follow negative people. I'm trying to change how I say words because unfortunately, Karen, anyone named Karen, they're having a rough time right now. Everyone's like, oh, that's a Karen. And that just seems, words matter, right? Words matter. So word choice does matter. So I'm trying to not say those things like negative Nancy. What did Nancy do? She didn't do anything to me. So yeah. Delivery of the message. This is how you're delivering it. Are you setting it up for success? How many times, and this is huge in education, how many times have you seen people deliver a message like, the boss wants you to do this, so do it, right? Like it's not really clear. They're not happy about it. They're giving it to you reluctantly. That's a problem. That's a big problem. Avoid gossip. This is also just as bad. I can't tell you how many teachers would go to their own students and share information about administration or say that they don't like administration. We don't ever gossip, especially down. You can vent to your peers or vent up, but we don't vent to people below us in the hierarchy structure because that will end poorly for you at some point. Be strategic and plan. We'll talk about that in the next section. Maintain praise and thanks. So finding out how people feel appreciated. There's a really great, a whole section that Malcolm Gladwell, who's this great writer, he has a whole section in one of his books. I believe it's Outliers. Maybe that's where you got that from, Dwight, where he talks about incentives. And what do we do to incentivize people? Incentives is just means what motivates you to do work. Is it the prospect of a bonus, more money? Is it the prospect of food? What if they feed you every day? What if they do raffles for gift cards, or you get prizes for doing so many referrals? You get this or that. Maybe it's a vacation. So what motivates you to do work? Knowing that from other people is going to be really valuable as a leader. If I know that you appreciate words of praise, I'm going to write you a thank you card. If I know that you like awards in front of your peers, I'm going to give you an award, a certificate in front of your peers. If I know that you value, whatever, time with your family, maybe I get you guys a vacation place for a local hotel. So we have to know about our people to know what type of praise and thanks they will appreciate. For me, it's time spent. Like, that's one of my love languages. So if somebody wanted to give me something, they would give me the gift of time. They'd give me the day off for the day, whatever. Mel was like, bonus. Bonus is like when you get extra money at the end of the quarter because you did so well. Separate friendships. So if you worked in this department and then you got promoted, you really have to work to separate your friendships. And then this idea of always being professional. So trying to make sure that when someone's saying things, even if you want to go down to their level and start talking bad to them, we have to try to be above that and try to always be professional. So which one of these do you struggle with the most? Which leadership tip do you feel like you need to work on? For me, it's the delivery of the message. I don't always deliver it well. Sometimes I just tell people what I need because I'm in the moment and I'm like, hey, I need you to do this for me. But I'm not like, hey, so could you please get this done? And this is what I need it by. I just do kind of like drive-bys where I walk by and I'm like, hey, I need this. Hey, I need that. And it's almost like a shotgun approach. Dwight says separate friendships. Yep. Does that mean we're not going to be friends after this? Ooh. It's hard when you work with people, right? Yep. I get it. That's fine. I'll cry after I get off the air. Melba says mine's delivery of the message. Yep. Praise and thanks, Robert. Yeah. Knowing how to appreciate others. I mean, how often do we even struggle with this in our personal relationships, let alone in a business relationship, right? Yeah. Yep. If I know a client values, I have a friend who works for a couple companies. I've done some work for them. And when he comes into town, he loves to know the newest, coolest, hippest restaurant. So I spend time researching, making reservations, and I take him and his coworkers there because I know it's something he values. Understand roles and responsibilities of how to distinguish what I can take on more without backlash. Yeah. Amanda, deliver a message, set clear expectations. Yeah. Praise and thanks. Good. Great job, guys. So if we look at this, this model, let's talk about what the difference is between a leader and a manager. What do you think the difference is between a leader and a manager? We didn't already talk about this, did we? I don't think so. Difference between a leader and a manager.
I think a manager's more of a role. A leader, anybody can be a leader.
So a manager is a role, and a leader is something anyone can be. Okay, yeah. There's no wrong answers, Angel. You're good. By the way, on a side note, I've always dreamed of going to barber school, just so you know.
It's a lot of fun.
Yeah. And plus, I think my family would save a ton of money on haircuts.
And beard trims.
There. Oh, I need one. You have to send me the information. I need to get a haircut, and I don't want to go to my bougie place I usually go to. So I'll come support you guys. A leader motivates their employees, and a manager manages the employees specifically to the job function. Matt, yeah, I could see that. Yep. Leader will get into the trenches with you, and a manager will tell you to dig. Wow, Jackie, that sounds like a prison guard, is what that sounds like. But you're right in the idea that a manager manages, right? They don't really help you dream. They don't help you grow. It's more about making sure everything stays running. Everything stays going in that direction is a manager. And to be honest, we need managers. I think sometimes we live in this world where we tell people everyone should be a leader. And you know what? To be honest, I actually don't agree with that, because a leader can change things up. A manager keeps things going the way they've been going. And let me tell you, I'm a pizza fiend. I love pizza. And if I order from Pizza Hut, I don't want some leader going into Pizza Hut saying, let's dream a new way of how we can make this pizza. Shut up. No, not at all. I want it the same way I always get it. That's the way I like it. I want a manager. I don't want a leader. I don't want you reinventing Pizza Hut. I want a manager who just keeps doing what they're doing, right? There is room in this world for managers. So I don't want us to think that there's no such thing or that we shouldn't have it. Sorry, I got a little passionate there for a second. I might be a mild bit hangry. Pizza is the equivalent of Dutch Bros. Well, I was going to say a different pizza place, but you probably never heard of it because it's downtown and real hip. That's not true. It's not that hip.
Hungry
40301 is my favorite. What, Danielle?
Hungry Howie's.
That is garbage. Hungry Howie's?
Oh my goodness, we can't be friends.
You like cardboard? What's happening?
Hungry Howie's is so much better.
I'm just kidding. So there's actually no Hungry Howie's near my house. I live in downtown Phoenix, so I don't know Hungry Howie's. I've eaten it maybe one time like 10 years ago.
I've been eating Hungry Howie's since high school.
There you go.
They would come into our high school and we'd be able to buy like the seniors and stuff would buy pizza and it would go towards our like senior trip.
Oh, there you go. So. Yeah, Illuminati's. Oh, Matt, now you're talking my language. That's like Chicago style pizza. Ugh. What's coming soon at Baseline and Central, Angel? I thought that's where that amazing Mexican restaurant was. Ponchos.
It's still there.
Yeah, that's where President Clinton sat. They have a picture of him up.
Yeah, no, Hungry Howie's.
Oh, there's a Hungry Howie's? There you go. Well, if we look at our little graph, we can kind of look at the difference between management and leadership. Management really has to do with this idea of planning, budgeting, organizing, staffing. They kind of handle all of the, like I said, the details, right? They want to keep the train going. They have problem solving, measuring, doing what they know how to do, producing dependable, reliable results. But then leadership is this idea that you're establishing a direction. You're giving people a reason why they should go that way. You're aligning people. Typically, you're more motivating, inspiring. You're mobilizing people to achieve results they never knew they could. And you're propelling people into the future. So there's room, again, for both of it, because if we want the train to go, we can't inspire it to move. We have to actually build things and create ways for it to move. So there is a need for both in this world. I used to tell high school students all the time, don't ever be ashamed of being a burger flipper. We need burger flippers in this world. Obviously, with my body type, I eat plenty of burgers. So we need them. They should exist. And that's okay. All right. So if we look at this idea of performance management, this is where we have to figure out, how are we doing? Are we able to do well in our performance, or do we have to up and change our game? Again, this is the ongoing process of communication between a leader and an employee. So I actually use the term of, I think I may have shared this last time, 360-degree leadership. Have I shared that with you guys? 360-degree leadership is this idea that some of us prefer to be led from the front. They say, go that way, and we go that way. Some of us prefer to be led from behind, where people are pushing us going, you can do it, keep going. You can do it, keep going. And then some of us prefer to be led from the side, shoulder to shoulder, saying, let's do this together. That's a 360-degree leadership model that I really like because it shows that sometimes we need one of each. I need people walking through the trenches with me sometimes. So which side of that 360-degree do you prefer? Do you prefer being led from the front, being led from the back, being led from the side? What do you prefer? Because whatever you prefer, you're going to have to share that with your supervisor. You're also going to have to share that with whoever you're managing, right? You got to make sure that you set these people up for success. Anybody? Which leadership style do you prefer out of the 360-degree? Side, yep. Stacy, having someone walk through with you. The front, yep. Side by side, Robert, yeah. Yep, Dwight from the side, yep. Front. I don't like people in the front only because I always get lost. I get distracted along the way. So sometimes I need them side by side so I make sure I'm not running off because they're like, go that way. And then I start running and then I end up zigzagging and then I'm like back at the start and I'm like, how did I get here? Sal says the front and pull me. There you go. Ralph has no idea. Ralph's just laughing. All right, so why does it matter, this idea of performance management? Why does it matter telling people how we like to be led or having this open communication about what incentivizes us? Well, it promotes communication between us and our leadership. They're able to provide more useful feedback about our job performance if they know our styles. We're able to facilitate a better working relationship. How many times have you talked to somebody at work and you've explained something about your personality and they're like, oh, that's why you do that. Or, oh, that's why you said that. It's because we don't know what we don't know about other people. So being able to have that helps facilitate a better working relationship in our teams. Providing a historical record of performance, that can help because then we're able to say, I talked to you about this, but I told you need to work on that. And now I'm showing you how I worked on that. That's what I was talking about when I told you guys how to get a raise, right? It's providing a historical record of performance saying, hey, what can I do to improve? And then spending 30 days improving. And now you get a raise. This also helps to continue to professional development. So now that you know what you do well and what you need to work on, you're able to pick professional development strategically so that you can make sure you are learning those things you need to learn. Growing where you need to grow. This is the PCER model. And basically, it's just where we plan, we coach, we evaluate, and we reward. These are how we can function around performance management. You want to make a plan, and that's why typically when you get a job, they put you on some sort of like a professional growth plan. I've had one at teaching. I had one at the bank. I've had one in different places. And then you have someone who coaches you through it. You might have quarterly meetings, monthly meetings. Then you actually sit down and have yearly evaluations. Then if you do well, usually you get a reward. And rewards can be a raise. Reward can be a title change. It can be a promotion. It can be a lot of different things. All right. So let's just talk briefly about self-awareness and attitude. And I think this is pretty crucial stuff because if we're talking about what we know about ourselves, you can't walk into your new job and not be able to articulate what you know about you. That's a problem. And a lot of us don't think about how we react, whether it's pressure or we'll talk about triggers. So there are different pressures that happen to us in the workplace, right? Customer complaints add pressure to us. Lack of resources at work add pressure. Malfunctioning technology, which now apparently you'll be able to fix, so that's good news. Personal problems, unsatisfied customers, deadlines, mistakes, and absenteeism. These all add to pressures. And we've talked about this before. when we add pressure, we become a little bit of a melting pot, right? Where we've built up so much pressure inside that we explode, and that's always a problem. Dwight, technology never malfunctions, only people. Well, I am a malfunctioning person. Let's just be clear. So let me ask you, what other pressures are there in workplace? What other pressures would you add to this list? Because this is not an exhaustive list. I don't see coworkers on that list, right? Coworkers sometimes can be an issue. They can add more pressure. What else? A toxic environment. Okay, yeah. And sometimes a lot of these things add to a toxic environment. Or maybe it's a problem in leadership that makes a toxic environment. Any others? Yourself. I think that's personal problems, Ralph. I think that falls under personal problems. Just guessing. Health issues. Yep, that can be an issue. Yep. Somebody actually said in another class, what about where you are sitting, right? Like the location of your desk. That can be a pressure. If you're right under the AC, or maybe you're in a hot office, that can be a problem. Yeah, Melba, coworkers, you're right. So the real answer is, when we feel all this pressure build up, what do we do? Are there things that we can put into place? So some of the things that we can do is be flexible, right? We can identify the bigger picture. We know that this is not about us. It's a small thing. We can be mindful. Mindfulness is a really great thing. I've been trying to wake up every day and do morning meditations, and then I make a list of things I'm grateful for that day. So I try to do that every day. I missed today. I did the last 2 days, but I missed today. But that's one way I can be mindful, be humble, know that other people may be struggling more than me. Yep, Melba, cool down. Exactly. Emotional intelligence is the only thing that's such a buzzword right now. But what emotional intelligence is that you become self-aware of your own emotions, and you can recognize emotions in other people. So the way we do that is we maintain a positive attitude. We become more self-aware. So if you've ever been emotional, something usually happens in your body, right? Like when you are going to be angry, you might shake. Your face might get flush. If you're sad, maybe you look down. Your eyes start to well up. There's always a physiological body response to our emotions. So if you see those bodily responses starting to happen, you can actually stop yourself and say, I need to break real quick. I'm going to go use the restroom and I'll be back. I'm going to go take a walk. I don't want to say something I shouldn't say. And we recognize that when our body starts to feel this way, we stop it, we take what we need to take, we get away, we feel our feelings, and then we can come back to the conversation, cool down. So it's really important to be able to recognize what your body does whenever you're emotional, because that helps with self-regulation, which is important. And then this idea of being empathetic. So empathetic means, or empathy means that I can put myself in your shoes. I've been there. I know what it's like. But I can't be empathetic if I don't know what it's like. If I've never been in your shoes, or I've never experienced the hardships you're experiencing, that's not empathy, that's sympathy. Sympathy is feeling bad for someone who's going through something. Empathy is when you can be in their shoes because you've been there before. We have to be clear about those distinctions, because people can be empathetic when they've never been in their shoes, and that feels dismissive. Does that make sense? Yep. Cool. So perspective is this idea that we have our own way that we view emotions. Wow. Well, the way we see the world, the way we look at things, our lenses, that we view the world changes. And so we have to know what it is so that we can share it with others. If we don't share it, we end up adding tension. We can have differing opinions, which cause tension. We have miscommunication, which causes tension. Misunderstanding causes tension, and personality characteristics. I will tell you, 9 times out of 10, the issue is miscommunication. You've said this, they've said this, but one of you misunderstood. You miscommunicated. You didn't mean it that way. That is 90% of the time what I see with groups. It's about miscommunication. Do you agree? Disagree? Have no opinion? Totes, Danielle said. Totes. All right. So if we look at workplace triggers, trigger is a word we use that explains an emotion we feel today because of something we experienced before. So something that we experienced in the past, it feels similar today, so we get emotional today, is basically a trigger. And it's all these things. Discipline can be a trigger, feeling disrespected, feeling like somebody did violated one of the rules. There was mistakes. We feel excluded. People are breaking the rules. We feel rejected. We feel unimportant. We feel insignificant. There's a dispute maybe, so we don't like conflict. We feel jealous or afraid, wronged, betrayed, disliked. We feel like there's no control. We feel like there's loyalty problems, or we feel unsatisfied. So what's yours? What is your workplace trigger? Mine would be unimportant. Pete, that's not on the list there, Pete. Grouchy patience. Would that feel disrespected? Matt says insubordination. Wow. Angel says wronged. Rule breaking. Yep. Disrespected. For me, it's unimportant. I like people to like me. So if I feel like I'm unimportant, or if I feel like people I'm disliked, that actually triggers a lot of things inside of me that aren't good. I get really nasty. Any others? Dwight says afraid. Okay, yeah. Listen, let me be clear. If you don't know what your triggers are, you need to find them out, because you should not be the last one to know what bothers you at work. You need to know what it is. So if you are unsure, figure it out. Right before you get really upset with someone, what just happened? What triggered that you being upset? Look at that, experience that. Even though it's not fun, relive that, because that can tell you a lot about, what you care about, and that will make you a better worker in the long run if you know the answer to that. No control over things that you are accountable for. Yep, loyalty.
Yeah, I would say loyalty, just because of the fact that, like, and it's actually come across a couple times. I'm still new at my job. I've only been there like 2.5 weeks, 3 weeks. And so there's been a couple people that are a no call, no show. And
Yep.
so, and they're supposed to be up at the register taking over for me or anything like that. And so the loyalty is really, it kind of like really frustrates me, because they come in for the, interview and all that stuff. They go through all this stuff to get hired, and yet they don't even show up.
Yep. Yep. I
So
get
then
it.
it's difficult for like the ones that are actually there
Hmm.
to, you know, depend on them, kind of thing.
Totally. I agree. That's a great example. It's unfortunate that it's a personal example, but it's a great example. So sometimes we react to these triggers with negative emotions. Things like being rude, crying, withdrawing, being sarcastic, lashing out, wanting to escape, yell, scream, retaliate. This says fight, complain, compete. This should say flight, meaning run away. Gossip, sabotage, control, justify, blog, and manipulate. So what do you go to? For me, I withdraw. So when I'm mad, I'm upset, I'll say, it's fine, I'm fine. No, it's fine. I get really short and then I just kind of walk away. So I'm withdrawing myself and I'm withdrawing from the conversation because I either didn't get my way or I'm upset, which is definitely not cute, right? It's not a good thing that I withdraw. I need to show up and be honest about what I'm feeling. So that's something I'm trying to work through. But sometimes I know I'll say things I shouldn't say, so I try to run away. How about you guys? How do you typically react? Wow, Pete. Retaliate. That's the first time I've seen retaliate. You justify it, Dwight? Yep, I get it. Withdraw, escape. Yep, Stacy. Withdraw followed by manipulate. Yeah, you want to get something back. Smile, laugh, and then flight. Jackie's like, oh, yeah. I got to go. I get it. It's hard. I'm with you. Withdraw, Melba, ignore. Yeah. Ignore is tough for me. I have a really hard time ignoring it, but that's really good. I'm usually much more like Jackie or Stacy. Sal, lash out, retaliate, fight. And there is a place for that, right? There's a place to do that. And there's a way to do that verbally. The problem is sometimes that does not come out the way we should. It comes out in unhealthy retaliate and fight. I get it. Danielle, complain. Yeah. So here are some appropriate workplace responses to those emotionals. Now, again, let me be clear. If someone's really yelling at my face, swearing at me, it's going to be really hard to be humble, respectful, to listen. So I don't want us to think that we have to choose one of these, but I do think these are the healthiest options. So I want us to look at this list and say what we would like to grow into. What do we want to be able to do when we react? Do we want, like, I really want to seek guidance. Yep. Dwight, listen. Yep. Be humble. I love it. Yeah, to be able to still communicate even though I'm feeling upset about it. That would be awesome because usually it doesn't come out the way I want to when I'm upset. Be respectful. Yeah. Yeah, to be able to communicate clearly. That's huge and tough. Angel says, put the other cheek. That is tough. I only have so many cheeks. I get it, though. So I think we struggle because sometimes we don't know this word assertive. There's a really interesting thing where it's all about me and my needs. Then I get aggressive, right? But if I'm always putting everyone else's needs ahead of me, then I become too passive. And so this really sweet spot is right in the middle, and it's this idea of assertiveness. Assertiveness means that we can control our emotions, we communicate effectively, we focus on interests of both parties. So for me, I really want to work hard at being more assertive. This is something, this is a word I use a lot in my morning meditations because I really want to be clear, to be concise, but to also stand up for what I think needs to happen, whether it's for me or someone else. Assertive communication, this is a proactive method of expressing feelings and desires, but it's not about trying to dominate other people. It's about clearly stating and being forthright. And it's the ability to express yourself and your rights in an open, non-confrontational way. I'm going to start reading a book called Nonviolent Communication. And it's just this way of how do we communicate in a non-confrontational way. I want to make sure that you understand my needs, but I want to do it in a way that you can hear me. Because if I start off by saying, let me tell you something, already you're not going to hear anything I say after it, right? You're already triggered. You're already feeling some emotions. So I have to learn how to say things in a way that's non-confrontational. Whenever we feel impulsive, whenever we feel like we want to act out of our emotions, we have to stop, think before reacting, stop to breathe, and then repeat when we feel impulsive. So think and breathe, think and breathe. Whenever your mind's at a really high emotional state, water and time are the only things that will bring it down. Water and time. All right, so that concludes our first part. Our second part isn't quite as long, but what are one or two things that you can take from this first part and implement tomorrow if you needed to? One or two things that you can implement right away. To be like water, my friend. What does that mean? You're going to have to explain that to me, Angel. What my trigger is, okay, and how I can react appropriately. Yep. That's good. It's important. Better listening skills, understanding my triggers. Yeah. Good. I'm glad. Find a way to communicate appropriately when triggered. Yeah. Sometimes we have to find like the quickest exit, right? And we have to know where it is. We know where the bathrooms are. We have to figure all that out because we know if we have such an issue, we might have to bounce quickly. Any others? Think rationally when in a tough situation. Yeah, Pete, we got to actually put in some things to do so that we are able to think rationally when it's a tough situation. Yep. I agree with Jackie. Okay. Be assertive. Yeah. Great, great. All right, let's move on to our last portion of our class. And this is this idea of career and goal setting. Career and goal setting is where we're going to finish tonight, partially because we want you to career and goal set. That's something we really want to work on, which is great. So some of the things we're going to look at is enhancing our understanding of competencies, looking at clear expectations and boundaries, and we've already talked about some of that other stuff, so we're going to skip that. All right. So I want you to tell me a time that you had a goal and whether you were able to achieve it or not. Give me a goal and whether you were able to achieve it or not and why. So like for an example, when I turned 30 years ago, I decided I wanted to be at my high school weight. So I hired a trainer. I ate tuna out of the can. I trained all the time. And after about 10 months of working out and getting crazy, I was able to be my high school weight the day I turned 30. So that was a goal, and that was what I did to achieve that goal. Now, I also wanted to play the guitar, so I took guitar lessons 7 different times, and I have no musical talent whatsoever. Still can't play the guitar. Oh my gosh, Dwight, sub 4-minute mile when you were a runner? You ran the mile in under 4 minutes? Dude, I can't drive a mile in under 4 minutes. That's insane. Q says, one of my goals was to start your own eyelash company. Yep, selling eyelashes online by March. Exactly. I love it. Oh, shout out. My website is, I like it, kayaandqlashes.com. That's awesome. If I ever need some, I'll let you know. Yeah, no worries. I think it's great. I love entrepreneurs is something I'm really passionate about, so I love it. Although I think I might need Dwight to teach me how to run a 4-minute mile because that's intense. Anybody else? Becoming a project manager of a commercial construction job. Yep, completed the goal. Great. Great. We all have goals we achieve, and sometimes we have goals we don't. But the way we view our goals is really interesting because I can't tell you how many times I talk to people and I ask them, like, what goals do you have for this year? And they're like, I don't know. I've got a couple New Year's resolutions. It's not the same as a goal, and that's what we're going to talk about. Dwight says, ran a 3:59:52 when I was 19, 1,000 years ago. Dude, that's insane. You must have been hauling. I don't care. Even if you're, listen, if it's the end of the world, I'm just going to lay down. I can't run that fast. You can outrun all those things. That's amazing. So let's talk about this idea of boundaries and expectations. Because if we have, Danielle wanted to go to culinary school. I love it. That's awesome. I actually, like I said before, I mentioned it before, my mom was a hairdresser when I was a kid growing up. And so I always thought about going to barber school because it just seemed like such a fun job. I literally have a bachelor's and 2 master's degrees, and I really want to go to barber school, but it's actually pretty expensive. So maybe I won't. I'll just intern under Angel. It's fine. If we have these goals that we set, but we don't set boundaries, that's a problem. If we don't set boundaries, how are we ever going to be able to achieve the goal? A boundary is just something that we put in place that helps us get there. So if my goal is to, I'm going to say drop weight because it's the easiest example that most of us can relate to, except for people who run 4-minute miles because you can't have any body fat if you're doing that. If I say I want to reach this goal of dropping weight, but I pack my refrigerator full of garbage, it's because I haven't set clear boundaries. And so that's kind of part of the issue. So we want to talk a little bit about how do you set expectations and boundaries? Well, we have to do a lot of planning. Not only do we have to plan, but we have to provide structure, and then we have to clarify roles. So let me be clear. If I'm trying to save money, we can use that example too. I have to plan out how much I want to save, and then I got to provide a structure for saving it, right? Whether I'm using Dave Ramsey's envelope method, where I'm pulling out money and putting it in an envelope so I don't only spend cash and no cards, or whether I'm using, I think it's David Black or Michael Black, David Black. He has another book about how to pay off credit cards. So whatever way I'm doing, I have to have some type of structure to do it. And then there's this idea of clarifying roles. So knowing the role that money has in my life, knowing the role that food has in my life, knowing the role of what working out has in my life. Clarifying that can really help set clear expectations. So why set goals? Well, you can't hit a target that you can't see, right? If we don't know where we're going, if I say, I'm going to lose weight, what does that mean, right? I can use the bathroom and lose weight. What the heck? So we have to be clear and specific. We have to know what target we're hitting. I want to be this type of weight. I want to look like this. I want to fit into this shirt. I want to do this thing. So we have to know what target we're aiming for. It also helps give this long-term vision with short-term motivation. So if I have this long-term goal of getting in shape or saving money or paying off debt, I have to see these short-term things that inspire me to keep going, right? Once you've determined you're able to dedicate resources and time to achieving them. So once you know your goals, now you have to know what resources you need to achieve that goal. What kind of time is it going to take to achieve that goal? Also, to be honest, business professionals, professional athletes, even YouTube influencers have goals. If you talk to most CEOs, directors, people high up in different fields, they are strategically writing all of their goals out. I have a monthly goal. I have a 6-month goal. I have a yearly goal. I have a 3-year goal, a 5-year goal, and a 10-year goal. And I rewrite those every year. I am crazy about goals. I write my goals on a piece of paper. I tape it to my door before I leave the house so I can read over my goals for be re-inspired for the day. I do vision boards, the whole 9 yards. It's actually really funny. The first vision board I did was in 2009, and I hung it up, and I ended up moving in 2015. And when I actually found my old vision board, on it, it said that I wanted to write a book. And in 2015, I was working on my second book, which was crazy. I kind of forgot I put that on there. Melba, good credit score goal after this year. I get it. I'm with you. I am with you. They can be as short or as long as we desire to make them. So we decide what they're going to be. Angel says we use vision boards. Yeah. I think they're great. I love them. So short-term goals are something you want to achieve soon. So these might be a week, a month, or several months. Once you set your goals, you have to actually start creating behaviors to achieve that goal. So it isn't just about setting a goal and then walking away being like, gee, I hope I get there one day. No, it's about making sure you are making moves to achieve that goal. Long term, these are typically things you want to do in the future. 3-year, 5-year, 10 years. This requires a lot of time and energy to think through. I usually spend the whole second week, third and fourth week of December writing goals for the year. And that's usually all I'll work on during those 2 weeks. They most often require shorter term goals to help achieve the long term. So we'll use a combination of short and long. And then how we write them is really important. And that's why you've probably seen this if you've ever talked about goals or been somewhere they've talked about goals. This idea of a SMART goal. SMART goal means they have to be specific. So I can't just say I want to lose weight. I have to say how much weight I want to use. I got to be as specific as possible, right? They have to be measurable. So I can't say I want to lose a lot of weight. What does a lot mean? That's not measurable. I want to lose these kilos, these pounds, whatever. And then achievable. Is it actually realistic? If I want to lose 20 pounds in 1 month, can I do that without surgery? Probably not. So maybe at first I can, but how can I consistently make sure it's achievable, right? I for sure can't do a 4-minute mile tomorrow. That's not a goal. So that's not achievable. And then relevant. Is it something you care about that you actually will want to do? And then time bound. What are the time restrictions? Is this, I want to achieve it in 6 months. I want to achieve it in a year. How am I going to check progress? So it really needs all of these things. The more you stick to a SMART goal, the more successful and the more you can track your success. So this is what I use for all of my goals as well. I find them to be really, really important. If you're not writing goals, I really encourage you to. In fact, we may finish up early tonight so that you can use goals. You can write goals. Your homework is going to be to write a short-term and long-term goal. We won't have class again, so I'm just going to trust you. You're going to do it, but you guys can find me on LinkedIn and tell me whether you did it or not. That's fine. Yeah, this will be your homework. All right, so making expectations clear. Yeah, we've talked about that already. We'll talk about boundaries. Boundaries, it's really interesting because when we look at what a boundary is just, it's basically like a property line. It's where we say, don't cross this. And so we need to put up boundaries so that we know what we can and can't cross on our way to reaching our goals. So some of the things that boundaries mean for leadership are goals, purpose, behaviors, culture, and typically it's how work gets done. So I used to be very specific about my boundaries. So whenever I was looking at my work, I would say Monday is mandatory Monday. So I'm going to do on Monday all the things that are mandatory, right? So sending my invoices to people who use me as a consultant. I'm going to do what else is mandatory I have to get done. Sending out emails to people, trying to drum up business, that's mandatory. I would work on that on Monday. And then Tuesday was Tech Tuesday. And so Tuesday I would work on things like social media, creating advertisements and marketing on social media. And then Wednesday was Website Wednesday. And I would go and check all my websites, make sure I was getting the information, make sure people were ordering properly. And then I would basically do that every week so that I had very strong boundaries about when I did what thing. Now, quarantine threw that all out the window, and now every day I have no clue what I'm doing. But that was a great way to start off. I just have to get back to doing it. So for me, it is like a property line saying, today is the day I work on this. That way my mind is focused on one thing, whereas right now during COVID, my mind's been focused on 20 things, and I'm exhausted all the time. So what boundaries have you put into place while working towards your goal? You have to ask yourself, what am I allowing to happen, and how am I creating those boundaries? So am I going to allow things to happen to me when I put up boundaries, or am I going to create different avenues? So there are people who I spend time with who are time suckers, right? I spend time with their energy zappers. So I have to set a boundary that I don't want to spend time with them when I'm trying to be creative. So I'll say, hey, my boundary is I can only spend time with them once a month. Or right now it's easy. I don't spend time with anybody because everybody is a potential hazard. So, but asking yourself these questions is really important. What are you going to allow? What are you going to create as far as boundaries go? Does that make sense? What boundaries have you guys put into place? Let me hear some of your boundaries. None yet, but I will soon. Okay, yeah. Send the kids off to bed. Yeah. Yeah, but you do it at a specific time, right? You do it when and where you want to. Yeah. Any others? Wise spending. Yep. Yep. I actually have a big sign on my front door that says, do you need that? Because sometimes I feel like I do, especially in quarantine, where I'm like, Amazon will show up the next day. This is amazing. Jackie, get rid of all the junk food in the house. Yep. Yep. That's a good one. For a long time, I never bought soda. So I would have it if it was around, like at people's houses and stuff, but I didn't pay money for it because I wanted to quit my soda habit. Apparently that hasn't worked in a while, but yeah. Dwight, take a break from my desk every 30 minutes. Yep. That's actually going to be huge. Taking a 10-minute break throughout the day makes you more productive than if you just sit through a whole 4-hour-long class. All right. So we talked about this already. We talked about that. We talked about that. And even that. All of those. So I will ask you, what are one or two things from our goal setting workshop that you are going to put into place? Have a measurable goal for what, Jackie? Be specific. Okay, yeah, for losing weight. Set smart goals, set boundaries and realistic expectations. That's great. I love all that. Yep, cute. Continue to build your brand. Yep, that's huge. That's huge. So you need to set goals to do that, right? So it is maybe a goal would be to post every other day about how you're helping people, or a strategy people can use at home, or you have to become the expert in their field to other people. So yeah, those are great things to do. As specific as you can is always great. Set expectations and boundaries. Yep. For me, setting boundaries is huge because more often than not, I usually lay down and let people roll over me, right? I'm kind of a people pleaser. So I'm like, whatever you need, whatever you need. It's okay if you're mean, it's fine. And so I have to get better at setting boundaries and saying, that's not fine. I didn't like how that went. So this is what I got to do. Sal doesn't have that problem because Sal likes to retaliate and fight. Like you said earlier. I'm just kidding. Making my boundaries clear, concise, compelling. Yep. Angel, that's perfect. I know, Sal, you're just a giant teddy bear, so I get it. Makes me an a-hole most of the time. You know what? Here's the deal. If you're not taking into account people's feelings, I get where that can be a problem. But a lot of times people will say people are being jerks, but really sometimes it's because I admire that you can handle conflict and I can't. So I don't know that it makes you that. You just have to kind of find that line of being honest and clear, but also you can maybe soften it up sometimes. So yeah, I get it. I get it. All right. Well, I'm going to put in the chat my email. You guys should already have my email, but I'm going to re-put it in there. If you've got questions or you still need to have me check on your resume or your cover letter, feel free to send it. The Rooted Connector is what I go by on Instagram. It's my public speaking Instagram. You're welcome to jump on there if you have questions. Or LinkedIn is a great way to find me, Adam Lee Brooks. Again, if you have questions, I want to be a resource to help you because this is it for me, but you guys are going to continue going on, right? You guys still have class going on, still have things going on. So let me know. I want to be as helpful as I can. So that's a way to get a hold of me if you need to. Again, you already had my email because I've been emailing you the PDFs for this class, but just to kind of remind you. Cool. That's all I have for tonight. So I want you to use the next 12 minutes to make sure that you go ahead and work on your short-term and long-term goals. Capiche? Caposh. All right. Well, thank you guys so much. I'll stick around. But if you're done, then we're good to go. Thanks, Matt. I appreciate you guys. Thank you all a lot. I appreciate you. Hope it was helpful.
Thank you so much.
Yes. Hope it was a helpful class.
Yes.
You're welcome. Thank you, Dwight. And I'm sure I'll see you soon. Good to see you, Melba. Thank you so much. You're welcome, Robert.
Good night, too.
Good night.